Gaggle. Gaggle. Hello.
Hello.
You can hear me?
Hello. Yeah, I can hear you. How you doing, George? Can you hear me all right?
Hi, Richard. Hi, Peter.
Hey, George. Hey, Richard.
There's Peter, too. How's it going, Peter?
It's winter. Do I need to say anything more?
Oh, you must be freezing, man.
No. It's actually been really, really mild. So remarkably mild.
Really? It's been kind of cold. I mean,
everybody talks about global warming. Technically, somebody stopped the recording, George.
Well, I have stopped recording since we're just bantering now.
Okay.
I will start.
Oh,
Okay.
if you guys are ready, let's roll. I know you're live streaming.
We're ready to go. All right, then.
Let's do it.
Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. With me today, of course, is my co-host, Peter Lavelle. And we are very fortunate to have with us, once again, our regular partner, outstanding pollster, Richard Baris. Thank you very much, Richard, for joining us. I'm looking forward to a very exciting conversation. So a number of things have happened since we last spoke. When we last met, this was just after the victory in Virginia. And since then, the victor, Youngkin, has flip-flopped a couple of times on the signature issue of the mask and the vaccine mandate. So he first said he's not going to impose it locally, but then there was a lot of blowback, and so he's now changed his position. And so yes, he is going to insist on rather not imposing it, but fighting against the imposition. So there's that. Then of course we had the Rittenhouse verdict, which was followed by the horrific attack in Waukesha. I can't pronounce it as well as Peter.
Waukesha.
Waukesha. I do. When somebody repeat, I can repeat it after somebody, and then I lose it. So yeah, Waukesha. Was that the horrific attack there, and the disgraceful media coverage of that, and then that was followed by the I think bizarre verdict in the Arbery case, which to me and to many outside observers is very similar to the Trayvon Martin Zimmerman case, which led to the acquittal, of course, of George Zimmerman. Here, it led to a conviction, and the defendants are all looking at either life without parole or life with a minimum of 30 years. So it's a very, very strange decision. So we had all of that, and then of course we've now have received your polling data, which are of course very interesting. So before we get onto your polling data, might you just talk a little bit about the background, some of the issues that I just mentioned.
Yeah, I think going in order, and it's always good to be back with you guys, both of you. George, Peter, hello. Yeah, let's go in order. So Youngkin in Virginia, I think it's very clear that, Republicans in Virginia tried to say, oh, the media made a lot of hay out of this, and it's really not what it looks like. To me, it looked like a very clear flip-flop. So he was going to do the National Review version of conservatism, which is the conservative case for mandates. You don't want big government telling the local governments what to do. That's a load of hogwash. You campaigned on it. You said you were going to, prevent anyone from imposing it. You were going to take the DeSantis route very clearly, not the governor of Arkansas and Kirsty Noem out in Nebraska or whatever, Kansas, excuse me. No, North Dakota, excuse me. South Dakota. I'm all over the map.
It doesn't matter.
That's how far from grace, though, she has fallen because of decisions like that. I have to get the fourth state to even get her right. I mean, she's not a leading contender anymore. And I think it was very clear Youngkin was going to pull that stuff. He was going to pull that nonsense. And I can't wait to get into some of that polling because we have fresh new polling on mandates and very worth sharing. But he reversed himself because increasingly this stuff is becoming less and less popular. And I told last time we spoke, I did say one thing that's key: Youngkin and Republicans better keep their promises. And we talked about if he doesn't, then there's a very good chance you could blow some of that midterm advantage that you have going into next year's election or the upcoming year, about a year from now. And then with the Rittenhouse case, correct verdict. I think that there was starting to be, we can see that the jury deliberated for the first day and found him not guilty on several charges leading up to that third day. It was that last charge where the video evidence was key. It was a linchpin because they did not look, the defense is getting a lot of credit here. The truth of the matter is the defense almost blew this kid's case, and the defense, if it wasn't for prosecutorial misconduct and just a bad case, then Rittenhouse could be facing similar penalties. Even that lesser charge that they really were weighing was 10 years, guys. Yes, and it could be another 5 on top of it. So, I mean, we're not talking about light time here. And the Ahmaud Arbery case, I tried to reserve judgment a little bit, but again, I think it's a clear testament that in this day and age, you better have some kind of video evidence because the media goes in there and pollutes the potential jury pool so badly. And defendants, they have not caught on, like Robert Barnes and I have said, they have not caught on to the importance of conducting significant voir dire, because if you don't, you will get a jury like juror number 54. And she will come very close to having a horse trading match, in the back. And I think in the case with Ahmaud Arbery, people are like, oh, it's all white, almost an all white jury. Race almost has nothing to do with it in this day and age. I can't stress this enough. We've been doing this for years now, and race is not that predictive of a factor when it comes, not for nothing, but it was an African-American grand jury jurors that let Darren Wilson go in Ferguson, or not let him go, refused to indict him because it wasn't indictable. But in any event, the linchpin was the tape, guys. And if in the Arbery case, if we had better footage, maybe if the FBI was, droning that neighborhood at the time, then we would have had a different verdict.
But the footage, which was volunteered, one of the defendants volunteered this footage. He took the footage. He thought that the footage would would vindicate him. If he hadn't given the footage, they might have had a better shot at acquittal. So the footage, it's precisely when you think that you are innocent that you volunteer to give this footage. Hey, look, I shot this footage. It vindicates us that we weren't in what the media are presenting it as. This was a lynch mob where we were trying to go after a young black man who was just simply out jogging. But I kind of agree with our friend Robert Barnes. Barnes says that it was the judge, again, a white judge, a white Georgian judge who made a complete hash of this case and essentially accepted the prosecution's interpretation of what the Georgia statute says. And the way you read that statute, it doesn't say what the prosecution says, but it was with the judge who went along with the prosecution. And once he did that, the defendants really had no chance, because if that's the case, then basically the prosecution is right. This was unjust imprisonment, and therefore it was Arbery who was entitled to self-defense, and therefore they were the aggressors, they were the ones who were pointing a gun at him, therefore they're guilty of murder. But I think that's a bizarre, foolish misreading
interpretation.
of statute.
Yeah, George, let me just say, because it goes to show you how both of these cases really brought to the forefront the very concept of the right of self-defense and Western value, that you have the right to protect yourself, your personhood, and your property and your life. And they came at it from very different angles. But that Georgia statute, ironically enough, I try not to bring this up, but I know somebody who was in a very similar situation. I suppose it was about 20 years ago. And a white woman, and she shot an African-American male in a very similar situation where she was, and I know she's telling the truth, he was attempting to take her firearm away. And yeah, it's true that she brought the firearm to the party, you know what I mean, kind of thing, but not a party, literally. I mean, they say the knife to a gunfight, kind of. She brought the firearm thinking she was a disadvantaged female. Anyway, when he tried to take that firearm, she did shoot him. Now, she didn't kill him, but she shot him and severely injured him. It wasn't even 20 years ago. It wasn't even chargeable. Let me tell you how different things are, because I look back at this now, and this is a woman who was married to someone who was in the military. That really didn't have much to do with it. He was an NCO. He wasn't some higher up who could pull strings. Fact of the matter is, he was not there. She decided, I'm a vulnerable woman, and I'm just going to go ahead and pull this trigger, because if he takes my weapon, I'm dead. And the police came, and it was ma'am this and ma'am that, and are you okay, ma'am? And no prosecutor on earth would have charged her. And now we're just in a different world. I speculate. I submit she would be charged today.
Absolutely. And after the Trayvon Martin case, that was 8 years ago, and the prosecutors initially also didn't want to charge, and then there was an enormous amount of pressure that came from Obama, MSNBC, and everyone else. So they charged, but even so, the jury kind of took a common sense view of it. I mean, basically there was a crime wave. Zimmerman was an auxiliary security guard at this complex. Much as the McMichaels were. I mean, again, crime wave. This person, Arbery, had been seen to be involved in breaking into houses. He'd broken into this house a number of times. They had footage of him breaking into a house. And initially, again, in this case also, the prosecutors didn't want to charge. They thought, again, this was self-defense. Political pressure came, and then they brought a charge. So it's an amazing reversal. I mean, one day, no, we're not going to bring charges. This is self-defense, and then you're looking at life without parole. So it's just quite an extraordinary transformation.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It's really quite remarkable to see how the erosion of getting a fair trial, because it's basically people up in the cheap seats that want to get an outcome, and I find it really very terrifying. I mean. I watched the Kyle Rittenhouse case very closely, and for me, it was just, I mean, I don't even know why it went to trial in the first place. The Arbery trial, I didn't follow as closely, but what's really sad is that one of the fundamental pillars of our society is getting a free trial and a jury of your peers. I mean, it seems like more and more so the powers that be. I mean, there's even an argument out there I came across. I couldn't believe it. Say we don't need cross-examination anymore. It's extraordinary. I mean, then why do we need trials? Okay.
I was just going to say, right. That's kind of the point, Peter. I mean, that's how we ferret the truth out during trials. I mean, this is what we do.
But what the media wants is they want lynches. I mean, but the media, they're the ones that say, you don't support a constitutional amendment against lynching. But I mean, every single day, an SUV, guys, killed 6 people. Right. I mean, are they going to charge the SUV? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Are they going to dismantle it? Is that the punishment of it, or put it into permanent parking?
But that's the point about that SUV, is that the media, their first impulse was to suggest that this was the result of a police chase. The police were chasing Brooks from another crime scene. So in some way, the police were vaguely to blame for this incident because, oh, it was a police chase. He was fleeing a crime scene. There was never any evidence for this. The media just kept repeating this over and over again that, oh, he was fleeing a crime scene. And then once they could no longer come up with that story, it was this thing, oh, the SUV plowed into the crowd, even though, in the criminal complaint, it said he accelerated as he moved to the crowd.
Moved to the crowd.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
George, they not only refused, to look at what, they refused to let go of something they didn't have evidence of, but they were running hit pieces on alternative media journalists like Andy Nigo and Tim Pool. Right. They, got the Daily Beast, sick the Daily Beast after these guys for going and seeing what clearly is a motive. Look, it is not hard to see a pattern, which is that every time there is a left-wing political activist, like, I don't like to name them thing, but, I tend to agree with the FBI and other people on that. You make them worse by lying on them, mentioning their names. Same thing we saw with Steve Scalise's shooting. We still don't know who was behind the Las Vegas shooting, even though we have photographic evidence of this guy doing crazy stuff that would indicate a certain persuasion. When the barricades came down in Washington, D.C., and the driver ran through a crowd, they were hoping to God they found out he was from Indiana. And they thought, oh, he's from Indiana. He's probably a Trump supporter. And they went nuts with this whole idea and narrative. It turned out he was Nation of Islam, had been living in Northern Virginia for years. So maybe once upon a time was from Indiana. They drop it, right? Now we see this other case. And of course, what are we here for a week, 2 weeks until they hope you forget about it? No motive is yet established. We all know what the motive is. Get out of here. If you could find his Facebook page before Mark Zuckerberg and his friends take all of his social media posts down, you could clearly see a motive. Yeah. Just like with Scalise's shooter, by the way. Same thing.
Give me a really quick example. I had the great fortune of getting back in contact with one of my graduate student friends. And he's always been kind of very moderate, left moderate. And I was talking with his girlfriend, and I don't really like, he's our friend, so I want to talk about life and all that. But politics inevitably weighed in. And we talked about this Waukesha issue. And he really thought it was a white supremacist that did it. Yeah. And I'm not going to use my friend's name because it's not important, but I said, what are you reading? What are you listening to? Yeah. I mean,
unbelievable.
The SUV guy, right? And I told him who he was. And he said, well, I didn't get that from the New York Times. I don't know why you're reading the New York Times after all these years. But my point here, and here's a very well-educated person, a good person in every single way, but he just took it for granted. And I told him this was a black supremacist that did it. And he was like, what? I said, yeah, it's a black supremacist. It does exist.
Right. Okay. We have a question here from Ryan Budwan. Thanks very much, Ryan. He says, any more thoughts on the current environment? To be somewhat cynical, do you want a trial by a jury of your peers? Look what's happened to the, quote, average people, unquote, tainted jurors don't produce fair trials. I mean, I think it goes to the point that you were mentioning, Richard, and I think you were quoting Barnes about the importance of voir dire, because if you don't do that, if you don't go into detailed inquiries about the background and ideas of jurors, you are going to get a lousy jury. And the whole notion of we just say, oh, the jury system, it's such a wonderful system, the best in the world. No, it's as good or as bad as the 12 people that you have selected to be jurors.
That's right.
There's nothing magical, intrinsically great about the jury system.
Apropos, gentlemen, there's a great film. It's called Runaway Jury. It's a great
Runaway Jury. Yeah,
it's a very good film, and it shows how a jury can easily be corrupted if you don't keep your eyes open.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you this, this idea. Well, we have this great, like George was just saying, this great, jury system. You're tried by a jury of your peers when you're not. George Washington referred to one of the Townsend Acts as the murdering acts because they would take you away, whisk you over to Britain, and you weren't tried before a jury of your peers. But all that's very well and good. The problem is the day and age we live in, and when we conduct these voir dires, the research over years now we asked people some really illuminating questions, and the pattern is clear as day. If you watch MSNBC or CNN, you are the most, I should say, the most ignorant to the facts that are really in these cases that garner national attention. If you read that, like you were talking about with one of your former colleagues, he reads the New York Times. Well, you would think the New York Times and the Washington Post, other national papers, were thorough, credible sources of information. They are the second most ignorant. So if you're a daily consumer of those papers, you are ignorant to the facts of these cases. It's been this way since Zimmerman, Michael Brown, you name it. It is the same thing over, and it was that way with Rittenhouse as well. So Barnes and I have this nice little thing, but it's true. If somebody comes to a client, hires me to do voir dire, I don't want the client to have an impartial jury. I want a biased jury in favor of my client. This idea that there's like some kind of impartiality as the goal is ridiculous. If you don't shoot for bias that favors you, believe me, you're going to get bias that does not favor you. And you could clearly see that, by the way, in the jurors' notes. What saved Kyle Rittenhouse was the video and the rule of thumb that if there's one or two holdouts on a jury, they cave more than 90% of the time to the majority. And that jury was obviously in Rittenhouse's majority, was for acquittal. And one or two, specifically one, it looks like, held that up for as long, was really hung up on that one charge in that last, not victim now, we could say assailant. He was an assailant. But she was hung up on that, and you could see the bias in her jury notes, guys. You could see it. She referred to that fire extinguisher as he put down the fire extinguisher. That was the prosecutor's version of events. Right. The defense said he dropped the fire extinguisher. So you could clearly see in her requests that she was at least buying that part of the prosecution's argument, or at least had a problem believing that Rittenhouse had dropped it and then moved on to try to defend himself. So look, this idea, impartial, it's the best system in the world. For Ryan's question, I have to say, no, this is why I do what I do, because I have faith, but I don't have so much faith in this system, in 12 people, that I'm willing to just let it ride like I'm at the craps table. That's right.
Yeah, but that I think juror 54 that you're talking about, she was the foreperson, which means that she was a very assertive person. It's the person who becomes the foreperson. That's the most assertive person. Who wants to be foreman? The person who puts his or her hand up. That he's going to be
so
doing the directing. She was obviously determined to push the jury in a certain direction, and she could have easily held out. She just said, I'm not going to go along with it, and then it would have been a mistrial, and then the prosecution would have, at the very least, have had another shot at Rittenhouse. So again, it is almost legal malpractice for lawyers not to do thorough voir dire. In the case of Roger Stone, how the hell could they allow a juror onto that panel who was an ardent enemy of Donald Trump? She'd written all these Facebook posts against Donald Trump. Not only was she on the jury, she, of course, became the foreperson. Who wants to be foreperson? Me. and that
perfect example. Yeah. Perfect example, George. And that is 100% true about the foreperson, which is why I had, a few handwritten jury notes and questions to go off of. But when we wrote up that profile, it's typical. We put them into different categories of personalities and then belief systems. And it was not a great juror for someone like Kyle Rittenhouse to have. But I think we may find out when the prosecutor, even if you have what we call red authoritarians, they're assertive people, they like control, they actually are very decisive. Even if they end up making the wrong decision, they just want to, they want a decision and they want to influence others to come aboard with their decision. They hold authority in high regard. They believe that really we should defer to authority. Perfect example of somebody who would say, Kyle Rittenhouse should never have been there with a gun in the first place. That kind of a person. Right. Never should have been allowed on the jury. Mark Richards never should have made it to the jury. So that was, he's sweating. Don't tell me he wasn't sweating bullets after the first day. He thought he blew the case. He promised Kyle Rittenhouse in a 3-hour acquittal. That is what he promised that kid. And 3 days later, everybody's wondering about the horse trading in the back.
Yeah.
Right. So he comes out now and goes to CNN and parades around like he's missed a big shot. He got lucky.
Yeah.
And his client got lucky.
Yeah.
Kyle got
in the
lucky.
end, those
Kyle
yes,
got lucky.
yes. In the end, those 11 people will wear you down. And I think what we may find out is that, you had those two prosecutors make really bad mistakes and lie. They put two witnesses on the stand they knew were perjuring themselves. What that can do to an authoritarian, we saw this in the case of Casey Anthony. There was an authoritarian on that jury. She didn't like watching John Ashton lie about the evidence, and you lose trust. And these are people that want to defer to authority, but then you kind of break their heart when the prosecutor lies. And you think, wow, I can't trust this guy. I wish I could, but I can't. So it may in the end have been, Binger Boy and the rest of them, just made some really bad. I am going to show you that he was shot in the back. And just ridiculous nonsense that we knew was not true. And if the jury feels like there's a dishonest prosecutor, sometimes we see them defer to the defendant.
Well, obviously,
or at least give them the benefit.
The jury saw the video over and over and over again, and then the new and improved version at the very last. That was bizarre. That was really something. I mean, that's
it's a trick.
I mean, but no, people that do that should be disbarred, okay, or maybe worse. However, my point is, the jury saw the video over and over again. I don't remember the guy that got his bicep shot off. His name was, I don't remember.
Yeah, I can't remember. Yeah, Grosskreutz, I think, something like that.
Yeah,
that's the one with the longer name.
You can freeze frame it. He's got his gun. Kyle's on the ground, and he's got his gun pointed at him. Why wasn't he arrested for attempted murder? Why wasn't he arrested? He had an illegal firearm. Was he charged with anything? There were a lot of, in that video, there's a lot of crimes being committed, and one guy was innocent, and he went on trial.
That's really testament to where we are now, guys. I mean, really in this system. And it's not just jury trials. But look at what we did to Brett Kavanaugh. Now he's not my favorite Supreme Court justice to be, but by a long shot. But this was a man that was raked through the mud over the accusations of people who should have been
six.
And yes. And even Casey Blasey Ford's own father didn't believe her. I mean, this is if anyone should have been investigated, it should have been these women for making false accusations of a nature like this. And I don't know, my generation, we had definitely a shift where, of course, you want women to be believed, but they were getting, there was an era of very irresponsible, loose accusations, and that could ruin somebody's life forever. And we saw that actually on display, that culture. We saw that on display, all grown up in a Senate confirmation hearing. It was appalling, but this is where we are. And nobody decided, well, why isn't Michael Avenatti being, investigated for bringing liars forward? He knows they're lying. Why aren't those what was the name? I forgot the name. The one with the rape gang. That was Avenatti's client. The gang rape.
Yeah, that's right. They went on this gang rape, Kavanaugh, he was this regular, rapist,
It was the same woman that was like a first or second university student, but she was hanging out with high school kids, and she made lived in a different locality. I mean,
but that was the thing again, which was so implausible. You mean you kept going to these parties to which all these boys, these gangs would come to these parties and rape all the women, and yet you kept going to these parties. So.
You kept going? Right. Christine Blasey Ford, too, had a history, guys, a very long history of appearing to be somewhat mentally unstable, and had a series of relationships that were really bad. And, I was trying to liken some of what I had seen during Rittenhouse trial to what we saw with, people may think Scott Peterson's guilty, but it's a perfect example. Rochelle or Strawberry Shortcake, whatever Nancy Grace, the name gave her, that juror had a lot of problems like Christine Blasey Ford. Relationships, was actually attacked by a man when she was pregnant. So the worst person you would want on this kind of a jury in a case like this. But they'll find a guy in that case, it was Scott Peterson. In Christine Blasey Ford's case, it was the Associate Justice now, Brett Kavanaugh. And it's like everything bad that ever happened to them, you're that guy and you're responsible. This is a sickness. It's a mental illness that should be treated. Instead, we're vetting it in public. It's just it's insane.
Right. You remember what the Obama administration, I think, when they approached the whole issue of campus rape culture, they pretty much removed all the defense protections from students who are accused of rape. And of course, it was absolutely outrageous because this happens all the time in universities. Girls have regrets about what happened the night before. Boom. Of course. They bring a charge. And that is just devastating to a young man's career. You're gone. You're fired. You're kicked out of Columbia. You're not going to be able to get into any other college.
But why are they trying to fix something that is not broken? If there is an accusation of someone breaking the law, call the local police. What are the universities involved in this at all? Call in the first place. Yep. Because when you're on a campus, your fundamental constitutional rights are suspended. Really? Yeah. It sounds like you're in prison. Okay. No, if somebody has regrets the morning after, call the police, okay? Why do you need to get the school administration involved, okay? Are they a higher authority? Do they have judicial authority? Of course they don't.
Okay? Well, the reason, of course,
is broken.
The reason is that they think that they're going to get their own back at the young man whom they hate.
It's retribution. It's retribution, George. Exactly. Yes,
that's right. Because this person that she's now come to hate, he will be kicked out of Columbia. His life will be ruined because he's got this stain on his career that he was kicked out of Columbia for raping someone. He won't be able to get to any good university. That's it. I mean, and you've succeeded in ruining a young man's life. I mean, that's what, if you'd gone to the police, then they would have to organize a proper inquiry, and then the lack of evidence would be.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, Tawana Brawley too, even off campus. I mean, we've seen where you destroy the lives of people because you had a lapse in judgment. So you don't know what to tell your parents, or you don't know that in her case, she didn't know what to tell her mom. So she fabricated a rape in the Duke lacrosse case. And, Al Sharpton came to her aid. It was those kids, they still were kids at the time, young men, whatever you want to call them. They never got there. You think life just went back to normal for them? Are you kidding me? They're all over the head. They're all over every news station in the country. They gang raped a young African-American woman. Yeah. Oh my God, they're demons.
Did you hear that Netflix is suing Kevin Spacey now? Because of
right?
The charge that was brought against him was dropped. The charge that he was fired, the allegation that was made led to his being fired from House of Cards. And now, years later, they're saying Netflix is suing Kevin Spacey because they fired him, I guess. Okay. Right. I mean, it's totally insane. Okay. The allegation made against him, the allegation that which is the predicate for him having his contract breached, was thrown out of court. Okay. And,
it's not unlike what happened in Charlottesville last week. I mean, remember there was that Unite the Right rally in 2017. These people, they came to protest the dismantling of the Robert E. Lee statue. They were attacked. This was a legal demonstration. In other words, they had a city permit. They were attacked by the anti-right, the Antifa. There was a melee. There was a fight, and now the people who actually started the fight sued the Unite the Right people because of mental and emotional damage that they had suffered as a result of the fight that they themselves had started. And then the court found in favor of the plaintiffs, and something like $25 million that they've got to come up with to pay the people who actually started the fight. It's just nuts doing this.
All of this over a statue, by the way. Because we can't put aside the media's role in all of this, because they have now become probably the greatest source of misinformation and a force of injustice in this country, probably the predominant force of injustice in this country. All of that in Charlottesville started over a statue that a tiny minority in the state of Virginia wanted removed, and around the country. It doesn't matter where you poll, even in the exit polls in the governor's race last month. Even the exit poll showed it was keep plus 20 or plus 30, something ridiculous number. They just removed the statue of Thomas Jefferson, which Trump at the time of Charlottesville said they would do. And everyone said he was crazy, that he was taking it too far. The country doesn't want this, but the media latches on to these clauses where like this tiny minority, and I don't mean racial minority, it's typically made up of white elites. Yes. You know, this tiny like white elite liberal minority pushes these agendas that nobody cares about.
No,
and they make a big deal out of them.
Least of all, African Americans. The idea that African Americans go past the statue of Robert E. Lee and say, "Oh my God, I feel so terrible about myself because of the statue." No one cared a damn. I mean, all those years when, you know, during the civil rights movement, no one ever raised that issue. The statue of Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis, they were all there. No one gave a damn about them. And then suddenly, 50 years later, you kind of invented this bogus issue. Oh my God, I feel so offended by this statue.
I really wish they'd make inflation racist, because then maybe they would do something about it. Okay. Because, I'm absolutely no. But see, I always go back to the structural problems. Okay.
What motivates them?
Okay. So, you know, when they arrest the SUV, okay, and stay with us until the commercial break, and then you go to January 6th again, okay, and then you go to the statue thing. But meanwhile, we still have how many tens of thousands of businesses have been crushed by the lockdowns, by these mandates. Inflation is not only do you have a middle and working class people already in tatters, now you're going to add this on to them. But let's go talk about statues and January 6th, okay? It works perfectly. So, it's anytime, it would find a real issue that we want solved, let's call it racist, and maybe they'll address it, okay?
There's a question here again from Ryan Bodwan. Thanks very much, Ryan. He says that, but George Soros funded DA and judicial, that's what George Soros funded DAs and judicial activists get you. They charge innocent people to ruin them. They let criminals run rampant. Absolutely true. But it goes back to an issue, and we've talked about this very often, which is what exactly is George Soros's agenda? Thank you, George. I mean, because everything he funds, there's something very obnoxious about it, whether it's, these DAs, with the revolving door approach to criminal justice, whether it's basically, legalizing all drugs, whatever the terrible effects that they have on.
It's disorder, George. Disorder.
But it's a strange thing to be bankrolling, for all of these things. Yeah.
We've talked, George and I've talked about this very many times. And I was going to say, and George just asked it, I'll ask it in a different way. What do you think? What is Soros's agenda? Because it seems like it takes, certainly it's an assault on any traditional values. Okay, I think that's pretty clear. He wants the removal of the rule of law, as the three of us understand it. I mean, again, these people, these prosecutors, in a sense, he wants to put them out of business too, because we shouldn't have any prosecutors, apparently. Okay. No. Personally, I don't really understand it. And I've been aware of George Soros for much longer than most people, because I saw what he did in Eastern Europe in the 1980s and the 1990s. Okay. I never in my wildest imagination that he'd be throwing so much money in the US and electing his own prosecutors. But I just, I don't see any upside. If you poll any of these things, it's tiny minorities that are for these things.
Right.
Yeah, maybe it's real basic, Peter, especially if you know his history a little bit better than most people. And I would just say, for starters, with the DAs, that got Newt Gingrich thrown off of Fox News, talking about George Soros's obvious campaign to elect these prosecutorial misconduct candidates. I don't even know what they all share in common outside of that. But, if you look at what George Soros has been for, and I know a lot of people on the right throw around, well, he's a socialist, he's for this, he's for that. I'm not sure it's ideological at all. If you know his history, you know that he has made a lot of money and has gotten a lot of power when something breaks. So when there's chaos or, a currency collapses, when a government goes down, he gets to rebuild it, in his image, basically. Yeah. He gets to fund all of those institutions that are going to be in his best interests. And so I really, the common thread I see with George Soros throughout his life is disorder. And it's like the rich and powerful love a crisis because, as Madison said, crisis is the rallying cry of the tyrant. So they absolutely love it because they exploit it, and it's just, and they can use it to get people to do things they would not otherwise have done ever. Just that they're in a time of fear.
He was anti-communist. Those were his origins there. Okay, I mean he was very much into dissidents and samizdat and things like that. Okay, but and that's fine with me. Okay, I mean it's a long time ago, but I mean this is an assault on the institutions of Western civilization. I guess he can make a lot of money on that somehow, or maybe it's just.
Well, that's how he makes his money. I mean, look, the guy. What is he? He's a currency speculator. I mean, he's not someone who uses capital in order to build anything. I mean, with him, it's just betting against currencies. So that's he just moves money around, betting as to which currency will rise and fall. I mean, he brought about he broke sterling back in 1992. He did that in Malaysia as well. He bet against the currency. He has been convicted of insider trading in France, and his apologists. They've got this go-to response that if you say anything negative about him, you are anti-Semitic. And that's what happened when you talk about Newt Gingrich. I mean, when Newt Gingrich was talking about these Soros-funded prosecutors, and then that woman, Melissa Francis, jumped in. Well, let's leave George Soros out of this. And then somebody else immediately piped up. Yes, let's leave Soros out.
Harris Faulkner.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
With the suggestion, I think, and Gingrich was kind of taken aback. Well,
he was like, "Wait, what?"
Soros because you're anti-Semitic.
Yeah, and Newt Gingrich, as we know, has been a very strong supporter of the nation of Israel. So the idea, of course, that what he was saying was the origins of it was some deep-seated anti-Semitism is crazy. But there's this knee-jerk reaction to defend him.
Right.
I mean, Newt Gingrich probably is one of the biggest public defenders of Israel on the airwaves. I mean, I can't think of two. Alan Dershowitz is another one. Thankfully for all of us, he's had a lot of legal cases to talk about, which he actually says things that I find interesting. But Mike Huckabee is another one of these public figures.
Yep.
I find it almost impossible if you're for an American first agenda. I can't understand how they can go on talking about the pros of the U.S.-Israeli relationship. I'm mystified by it.
You know what? You and Barnes would make a great topic of conversation on that. Seriously, we should do that one day. I generally come down on that, guys, and I don't like meddling in the affairs of other nation states. I really don't. But I do. I guess where I come down is the threat of Islamo-fascism in the area is really, that's it. That, and if you're old enough, like guys we are, you remember before the Iron Dome. And it was not pretty, so this idea, but I get it. I get there's a line between still serving U.S. interests and then, and then overextending that into, doing things we shouldn't be doing at all with Israel. Years ago, a lot of people don't realize this, but years ago, the United States was not as pro-Israel as it is now, or at least it is under most presidents.
But just going back to on your point about Islamofascism, the problem is that both the United States and Israel haven't really opposed Islamofascism. I mean, Israelis.
Well, that's the problem, right?
Israel has a problem with the Palestinians, but when it comes to Islamofascism, Israel has he's helped them along. I mean, the policy that they pursued in Syria has been to strengthen Islamofascism. I mean,
and Syria is not the only place either. There's just no doubt about it. I mean, and I get that, and so I do get those criticisms because without a doubt they pick and choose which side, whichever one is more convenient, and then get the Lebanese militias in the 80s, and then I mean they've made a lot of mistakes. But yeah, I wouldn't. Let me put it this way. I'm not saying I like the direction it's in right now. I could see a more useful path to being allied with Israel. I would take a more useful path. And I think Trump was trying to get us on that path. But he's being more pragmatic with the Arab nations that surrounds Israel, basically saying, look, it's not about Israel versus the Arab world. It's about radicalism versus everyone. And, it's bad for business for you. You want to be in power. You like regime credibility, stability. It's bad for business. And I would have taken it in that direction further. I think we would have had some real progress had Trump gotten another 4 years. And now it's just back to the, whoever can exert the most influence and who can get the most out of the relation. Now it's back to the way it was pre-Trump, which is even worse.
I think there's, but one of my issues is that, okay, fine, the U.S. and Israel have a close relationship. That's fine. States can make those decisions. But it's the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia. Talk about Islamic fascism.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody likes to talk about those things. Okay. And I think that, when you hear these ridiculous bumper stickers, like Iran is the foremost exporter of terrorism in the world, it's just patently not true. Okay. I mean, it's not Sunni. I'm sorry, it's not Shia terrorism.
It's not Shia.
You have to worry about Sunni. Okay. And where does a lot of it come from? And is
Wahhabism, Saudi Arabia
Israel mind that very much? Of course it doesn't. Okay.
Right.
It just that, it's one of these things going back to personalities. George and I commented on this a few weeks ago when Sean Hannity gets all upset that Netanyahu isn't prime minister of Israel anymore. I mean, why are you even talking about it? Who cares? That's the Israelis to decide. Okay. And then, when you have Netanyahu come invited to speak to a joint session of Congress to snub the American president, Obama at the time, is that why are we letting another country inject itself into our process? I'm very much against that. Okay, and I don't think it serves the American national interest.
But the interesting thing is that Trump in 2016 promised a very different policy in the Middle East than what he actually delivered, because he was then saying, oh, well, he's going to
Saudis.
He's not going to pursue a particularly pro-Saudi policy. He thought that, he's going to be fairly even-handed in his handling of the Middle East. And he's not going to embark on these regime-changing wars, because he basically said, Syria is on our side when it comes to these Islamic extremists, because back in 2016, he was still talking about the danger of Islamic extremism, Islamic fundamentalism. And he said, Syria is on our side. They're bashing these Islamists. He said that was about Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was bashing them. So what happened after the election was something very odd. I mean, like his first trip abroad was to Saudi Arabia. I mean, that was kind of strange.
Personnel is policy. Personnel is policy. He made really bad personnel decisions. And that's something he's going to have to struggle with if and when he decides he's going to run for president again, because there's a lot of people we talk to, guys. Of course, there is, without a doubt, he is holding 90% plus of his base. Biden and other Democrats are not. So that's why he's so strong right now against potentials. But there is a growing number of voices that were like, look, well, what kind of Donald Trump are we going to get? Are we going to get the same Donald Trump who makes mistakes and doesn't admit them and reverse course? Is he going to hire the John Boltons of the world again? So who is going to be in the next Trump administration? Because otherwise, I may want to look elsewhere to somebody like Ron DeSantis. We talk to a lot of people like that.
What he needs to do, like he did with the list of Supreme Court nominees, is that he needs to say Douglas McGregor is going to be my National Security Council advisor. You know how many people would say, "Yep, he got it. He understands. He got it." Okay?
Is the Federalist Society going to pick your judges for you still? So this idea was like some great victory or accomplishment with these judges. I mean, I think at this point has been blown out of the water. There's
Well,
only been a
exactly.
handful of them who are good. He should not have
Exactly.
picked Amy Coney
And
Barrett.
this is where Barnes has been
The Goa
brilliant
was the
because,
pick.
yeah, Robert Barnes, who just said, look, if you go to the Federalist Society, you're going to get these crappy judges, and that's
right.
what they've always done. That they're just going to get you these pro-business, pro-authority judges. I mean, but because that's what the Federalist Society is about, and I think that is the case.
Chamber of Commerce, the Chamber.
Exactly. And that's what you will get from the Federalist Society. But that's because Trump really had no idea about judges. I mean, maybe he has a better idea about them now. But I mean, well, look, I mean, Amy Coney Barrett, and Kavanaugh have not at all done what Trump expected them to do. But they're all basic recommendations of the Federalist Society. So what do you say? Oh, they're great. They're solidly conservative. They're great. They're great. And then of course,
instead of picking a Cuban woman who knew communism, who was, I mean, this is just, and had maybe a thinner record, but a solid record. I mean, we from public, even from not just her record, but some public statements. I mean, this is very indicative of the mistakes that plagued the Trump administration. And there are some people who just don't want to go through that again, so I can understand that. Now, without a doubt, look, he's crushing Biden. When we can get into that when you want, but right, exactly. That's just true. But I think there's some, the reason why we didn't add some other people to see if the, plausible alternatives. And I said this on Twitter because I get the DeSantis Twitter fan club that comes after me. Look, his name recognition is not high enough to put in a 2024 hypothetical matchup. There's no value to me doing that whatsoever. And then number two is that Ron DeSantis has made very clear, if Donald Trump runs, I am not running. So, I mean, there's no point to push division where there is none. And I think that's what a pollster is doing if they decide to do that.
Let me finish off this part here with a question to you. Can national figures, potential presidential candidate, can a Republican say anymore, I'll get conservative judges on the bench? Does that mean anything anymore now? I mean, is that something that they will say? Because it seems to me that's kind of been retired because what we've seen. Because you get
that's a good question.
You get libertarian Chamber of Commerce people. Okay, they're not conservatives. Okay, so it seems to me making that promise to the Republican base doesn't really carry any water anymore. What do you think?
I really do think that the only way there's going to be any value to a statement like that is if you explicitly state, I'm not going to go to the Chamber of Commerce Federalist Society for my recommendations like every Republican has done. And that is the extent to how conservative the Federalist Society is. That's it. They're economic conservatives because they believe in low regulatory environments. They're not conservatives by what most base Republican voters would consider to be, a way of life conservative, right? They're just not about that. And then there's a new division, really, that is, I need to be proactive. I'm not going to be the nice loser anymore, right? Like the proper loser, as we call them, right? The David Frenches, he's so proper, but he's a loser, and he failed to stop, him and his crew, his little National Review crowd, haven't stopped progressivism for as many years as they have had, the national spotlight. They're jokes. They're ineffective. And there's like the JD Vance wing and the Trump wing that says, we can be proactive with the power we get in office, because if we're not, then we're just losing. It's a slower loser, but we're just managing the decline of our way of life, continuing on down this road. And that's very much the Federalist Society, very much in that other category with the National Review, which is, by the way, becoming an extreme minority in the Republican Party.
But that's a very,
I don't know where some of these posters come from.
You're absolutely right about that, because that is the reigning philosophy among most American conservatives, which is the liberals will set the agenda, and we just accept that they set the agenda. We can occasionally disagree, but by and large, we'll go along with it. I mean, just think about when you remember when the first footage emerged of the Covington boys. That when we first saw the picture of that boy standing there in front of that Native American, boom, Right away, the National Review crowd came in, absolutely horrific, horrifying. They accepted it, immediately accepted that this was indeed, somebody who's on their side. This is a boy who goes to a Catholic school. They'd come to Washington to take part in a Right to Life rally. And National Review immediately accepted that this obnoxious boy was standing, blocking the way of this Native American. That's the instinctive attitude of National Review. Let's go. So just as with the whole thing about the taking down the statue, the conservative case for removing Robert E. Lee.
Yeah, it's always the conservative case for.
Right.
And then they go on this anti-conservative rant. It's incredible. And they did it with Kyle Rittenhouse too. They were right on the same wagon with, he really shouldn't have been there with a gun. It's a childish, stupid argument for David French to have made. It's just like my good friend Glenn Herman at New York City Guns. He's like, this is just a childish argument. Every American has the right to protect themselves. If he was improper, if he was carrying that firearm, it was improper, it was illegal, he would have been charged with it. But in fact, it was legal to do so under state law. So what are you talking about? You're just trying to sound like more proper, more virtuous, more understanding, more, you know what it is? It's the old way that the Europeans used to look back on Americans. Very barbaric. Why do they got to carry guns everywhere? With the little T in the, little T in the pinky in the air. They always looked at Americans as like less civilized than the rest of the Western world. And that they really belong in that artificial, as Jefferson said, artificial aristocracy. They didn't get there because they're merit, because they're incredible. Their intellect is just incredible, and everyone cares what they have to say. Nobody cares. They got there because of station, and now we're all forced to what? Listen to their views. Nobody cares what they have to say anymore, which is why they can't even keep a website running. I mean, and yet the media loves to cite them, and they play that stooge role all the time, and they do it happily.
Yes. Yeah.
But their vested interests are not threatened whatsoever. I mean,
that's right. It's right. It's exactly
they believe it. They like. It's a parlor game. It's a parlor game that they do. You can go and have a little Twitter war, and then you can, like McCarthy, 2-hour speech on in front of in the House of Representatives. I was listening to part of that and thinking that's a day late and a buck short. Okay, I mean it was just pathetic. It was just pathetic. And then Fox brings him on as if he's on a crusade or something like that.
He's a rock star or something.
Guy needs to be retired. He needs to be primaried and retired. Okay.
Horrible numbers from him this month, Peter. Horrible numbers.
That's it. So if we could just talk about these numbers, these are really interesting poll findings. So if we could go through them, item by item, because there were some really interesting things there, which kind of surprised me a little bit. But if we could just go, for instance, we could start with Biden's
approval.
Approval rating. That's
let me just say too, right off the bat, right track, wrong track should have been in there right before Biden's approval. But I could just tell you what it is. It's a little over 61% wrong track, 30% right track. In our polling, we're not like other pollsters. We don't find these wide 30-point gaps. We did this month. This is probably the worst poll and I've been struggling to look back and, in the work we've done over the years. This is probably the worst poll I have ever conducted or fielded for Democrats, meaning this is how bad it was across the board for the Democratic Party. It usually has never been this bad, but it's historically bad for them. And if you look at Biden's approval, it's about 39.8. If you go and look at, and I know I have right now the economy and jobs, but I brought it up just so I can specifically see it. Every age group, he's hurting. Every racial demographic is abysmal. If you go specifically to the party detail.
Richard, is it possible for you to post it so that we can take a look at it?
You mean on the screen itself?
Yeah, on the screen. So we can see it on the screen.
Yeah, let me see if I can share the screen. Okay, let me see. Share the screen, host disabled. You'd have to enable it for me.
Let me see if I can do
Which
something.
It may prompt you to restart it if you do that, but let me know. And I mean, really, we break it down like
multiple.
Yeah, just
okay.
Let me know.
So I think you should be able to do it now.
Okay, here we go. Whiteboard, desktop, Google Chrome. Here we go. Let's do this. Look at this. It's coming up now, right? You guys can see it. Okay. Look at this right here. We break it down independent, something else. Okay. We do this on purpose because these are third-party voters, right? So we always see these polls where they just say independent or unaffiliated. That's not how the voter file works in this country. I mean, the bottom line is there are non-party affiliated, which we specifically refer to as independents. And then there are third-party voters. They could be green, libertarian, tax reform, constitutional, maybe conservative, like the state of New York. There are other designations. And these are the voters that is widely believed put Joe Biden over the edge, all right, in 2020. That's what gave him a few thousand more votes in some of these key states to take the lead from Donald Trump. He is now at an abysmal 13% approved and 51.3% strongly disapprove. We've been watching this go from the 40s to the 30s to the 20s to now where we are. Independents are now at 30.1%. So this is why Joe Biden's doing so poorly. We put them together and we combine them, and you can see basically around 30.2%, 31% roughly, if you combine them together. Republicans, low single digits, and Democrats now he's starting to bleed with 15.6% disapprove, a little over 10% of that is somewhat disapprove, but it's still nevertheless a clear break in his base. All right, so this is a good place to start because when we start to look at some of these other questions that we have in here, you can see a fracture for the first time in the Democrat approval of Joe Biden. We have not seen that at this level until this point. And the big shift here, guys, was region. In the South, repeatedly, when we had Joe Biden in the mid 40s to low 40s, he was repeatedly in the mid 50s, even upward of almost 60% in the North. And you can see now he cratered quite a bit. So this was a major decline in the Northeast, the most liberal part of the country. And this is why he's having the problem. The Midwest and the South, they've been hurting on him for a while now, 38%, 40%. That's very typical. The West, even 38% this month, 39.4, whatever it is specifically. But these are, slight declines from the prior month, and they have been following the trend. The real big crash, and I think this is really important, the real big crash was in the Northeast. And why is that? What is driving that? The most important issues. If you look at what people care about right now, they're hurting. Cost of living is really a serious problem for people. Inflation is a serious problem. They're feeling it in the Northeast the way everybody else is now. Only it happens to be the more economically depressed area of the country. So if it gets more expensive to live and you're in the most economically depressed area, of course, it doesn't matter whether you're blue, you're red, you're going to swing. You're going to feel this. When we ask people about cost of living, specifically, about half of those people said groceries. And then the other two categories that were basically tied for second and third was gas and shelter. So these are major, you look at the old Abraham Maslow hierarchy of needs, guys. These are basic human needs. Right. They're saying they can't fulfill, or like one person on Saturday night told us, if I can find it, I can't afford it. If I can afford it, I can't find it. And it was stuck with me in my head all weekend because it was a profound thing to hear. It was a profound thing. It really just put it. This is by all intents and purposes, somebody who would normally on any given month tell us they at least somewhat approve of the job he's doing. They're a kind of COVID voter, and then this month they aren't. This month they're my gas bill is too damn high. It's going to cost too much to fill my oil tank this winter. That's what they're saying.
Richard,
go ahead, Peter. I see you looking for a question. Go ahead.
But I mean, obviously, when people feel that their standard of living and their lifestyle is being threatened, some people will react politically. Okay. But I mean, look at FDR. I mean, his first administration, he didn't alleviate the problems, but he gave people hope, and he was very, very popular.
Yeah.
My question is here. I mean, performance obviously is important, but also messaging. And the messaging for me is that they seem out of touch. They don't care. And significantly, and I think this is the most important thing going on, is that they look down upon people. They, you're impatient, live less. Oh, it's a treadmill you're worried about. I mean, I've never seen such condescension whatsoever. It means, messaging is important, okay? But I mean, if you can say, to tear a page from Bill Clinton, I feel your pain. I mean, he was good at it, okay, messaging. Is it their problem here is that they're not being able to, in any way, shape, or form, relate to half the country? Is this the reason?
There's an almost disdain that you can detect in the voice. Like Kamala Harris was asked about inflation last week, and she had put on that very annoyed face where she smiles, but you can tell she's just like angry, even though it's a weird face. And she is trying and struggling to address the concerns of people legitimately, which she knows are legitimate, but she's aggravated. She has to do it. It's like, these stupid little people are making me have to explain myself. The difference is good FDR analogy, though, Peter, because we also have the Registered Voter Economic Confidence Index. It started out under Biden, his very first survey. It was not that bad. People expected things were going to get better. Under Donald Trump, they thought things were going to rebound. And then they now, the difference, I think, is that they didn't blame FDR. They blamed Joe Biden. You know what I'm saying? So, and they blame him. They know it's his policies. They said, well, why did everything pretty much rebound post-COVID lockdown under Donald Trump? Why was everything almost back to where it was, except for, of course, we had labor issues, we had some distortions in the CPI, but generally everything, housing, all of those indicators across the board, except for jobless claims, things began to rebound. And they know that. It's like they instinctively know it, Peter. They know it. And they blame Joe Biden for it. I mean, this month, just to, let me show that to people, just so can look at some of those. The index is very much like, it mirrors the Consumer Confidence Board, the Consumer Confidence Index from the Conference Board that's conducted by Nielsen. The difference is it is relative value indexes. The difference is that 1985 is not our baseline, of course. So it does tend to come in lower. But the bottom line is you can see it start at a relatively decent level under Biden. And we have the 6-month outlook indicators that people thought were going to be more rosy, but now here we are 6 months plus from the start of that, and things aren't getting any better. In fact, they think they're getting worse.
But do you think that 1 year, because it's a year now, a few days, is it just buyer's remorse? Because I mean, his basement strategy helped get him into office. I didn't say elected. I said helped get him into office. And so he basically didn't make any. Okay, he's going to defeat COVID. Well, more people have died under his watch than under Donald Trump's. Okay, I mean, is it just this overall melees that I mean, you said things were going to get better, and you didn't say, I'm going to take a look at inflation. We're going to work on Morgan. It wasn't policy driven. Okay, it was says I'm better than the other guy. So, I mean, that created the situation of a huge letdown.
Yeah, I think that, and I've been saying this for months, but really that's a perfect point because I'm trying to drive this home. I think he made an impossible promise, which is that I'm going to do better on a pandemic. I mean, this is a guy who got thrown off the H1N1 task force. You really seriously believed he was going to do better as the chief executive during a pandemic? I mean, that was a little bit ridiculous, but that is the promise that he made to the American people. And he never received high marks on any other issue other than COVID, which I had told people was artificially propping up his overall approval rating. Once that goes negative, he and Democrats are going to be in deep trouble. Before I even get to the economic stuff, there's jobs in the economy. Here's his approval on the pandemic. Now we're down to 23.9 strongly approved, 19.5. I mean, gentlemen, 37.6 strongly disapprove. So he is in the 50s in strongly disapprove. And of course, now he's struggling in the low 40s on approval. That's it. That's it. It's over.
But I wanted to ask you about that, Richard, is that when people say, I approve or I disapprove of his handling of COVID, is it that they think he's doing too much, or they think that he's not doing enough? Is it they don't like the fact of the mandate, or is it that they think that he's just not doing enough, and that he, and that's why I just never know what exactly disapproval actually means.
That's a great question. I think that with Joe Biden, I think that it is a disapproval with people because there's a change of the guard now. People are coming to terms with some of these ideas, like, myself and others had said there was no evidence, there was no historical precedent for some of these like draconian mitigation strategies, but people believed him in the beginning. And now they're seeing, like you just said, and you're right, there are more deaths under Joe Biden, yet Joe Biden is pushing mandates. He had masks, imposed on children all over the place, on federal property, on airlines. You got to have passports, blah, blah, blah. They just don't see the fruits of all of these sacrifices. And some of them, no doubt, a part of this number are people now who once upon a time would tell you they supported the employer mandate, but now they do not. So they've changed their mind and they don't believe that it's effective at all. And then even the mask wearing, when we asked for the Epoch Times before the election, whether people supported mask mandates, it was almost 2/3 said yes. Now you can't get anywhere near that number. So people are coming to the realization that these policies, Fauci just yesterday, another threat of a lockdown looming, this is nonsense to them at this point. And there are some people who said, and Peter, you last time we spoke, you said it, look, I did what they told me to do. I followed the lockdown procedures. I got vaccinated. What the hell else do you want from me? It's obviously not working. Something's not working. Why should I have to continue to sacrifice when you're not holding up your end of the deal? And I think that he was getting high marks on COVID in the beginning of his administration because he had the vaccine rollout that was basically handed to him. Right. And then, he got credit for something that he got credit for something he didn't deserve credit for. I mean, that was Donald Trump who set that up. They were already on their target. They were already in the trend anyway, to hit the target that the Biden administration set for doses to be administered. They were already going on that trajectory. So I think he made this promise that he would do better. He said, I'm going to shut down the virus, not the economy, right? Guys, the virus is new variant around the corner. It's as daunting as ever. Right. It's here. It's going to remain here, like many of us said, by simply listening to vaccinologists and others who knew what they were talking about, and right. Dr. Fauci did not. The virus is still here and the economy is hurting. His approval on the economy is abysmal.
But this is what was interesting. I mean, you've mentioned this before, Richard, which is the media always say, these lockdowns, these restrictions, they're actually very popular. Yeah, we have all these demonstrations in all these European cities, but really the overall the public is in favor of these restrictions. And you're saying, no, that isn't true. And you have a poll.
It is not true.
That's not true. Yeah.
Mostly people.
Yeah. It is absolutely not true. And I mean, here's the employer mandate. If you look now, and I think what happened with the employer mandate, because it was a little bit closer last time when we asked, this time it's not. It went down 56-39. Last time it was a little bit closer. It was low 40s, if I remember correctly. I think what happened here now is that they see the impact, and they're not seeing any fruit to their sacrifice. So, all right, their neighbor maybe has to leave a job. I know someone personally who's leaving a job she's been at for 15 years. I think we all do. We have a neighbor, a friend, a family, somebody who's being impacted by this at a time when the economy is not sound. So they're not, it's like, can we afford to lose any more jobs? And this is now the big deal is that strongly opposed was 38% last time. It is now 46%. So the numbers are completely opposite of what the media will tell you guys. I mean, you can't manipulate it.
Do you have any idea of the financial breakdown of the people that you polled, because we keep talking
Very
about
interesting.
making the sacrifices, but see, this administration is asking working and poorer people to make all the sacrifices. If you're in a nice zip code, well, all this stuff is superfluous to you. Okay, and these are bumper stickers and virtue signaling. It doesn't impact their lives at all. And I think this is the gross miscalculation that they're making.
The 50 to 100,000, which is like, your very typical Trump voter, 50 to 100,000 working class, 46.3% strongly oppose it. But I will say this, if you make $200,000 or more, 62%. Yeah. Did you lose me?
No, that's really surprising.
Yeah. I do find, you know what it is though? If you go by education, then you see postgraduates are more in favor than people who don't. So if you're like if you're making good money, but you're not like a post-grad college educated person, you have like some college or even a high school degree, but you make a lot of money, you're driving this number. So if you're like a self-made man or woman, that's who's driving this number with the rich. And then the lion's share of it after that comes from your very typical working class, $50,000 to $100,000 household income. You do have under 30, which is a little bit less supportive.
That surprises me that it's lower among the.
You know what? And I don't want to like insult anybody, but this under 30,000 crowd is more liberal than the 30 to 100 working class, because these are people who tend to be more democratic and are on more assistance programs. All right. I'm just being real. And if you cross employment, then you'll see that's the case. I mean, so if you are not looking, then you support the mandate more than anybody. So if you're unemployed and not looking,
okay.
So in other words, guys, if you produce nothing and have of no value in society, I don't mean to be an idiot, I'm just being real here, then you support the, 60% support, oppose. I mean, but you support it more than other people.
But people like that, I'll say it in a different way, they don't have skin in the game.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's fair to point out. I do. Undergraduates, big movement this month away from Democrats and their policies came from people with a bachelor's degree. I just want to make that's another very important point. Postgrads as well did sour. But the big movement on all of these questions, on Biden's approval, on the generic ballot, they came from people who have bachelor's degrees. So I thought that was very interesting. Typically the some college is very good for Republicans, and Trump specifically. He didn't do badly among people who say they have some college degree. But yeah, I thought that was
very interesting, because
interesting.
That's what CNN and MSNBC are always punching. It's just stupid people that are conservative. It's lack of education. They keep punching that over and over and over. These people are not educated. That's why they don't understand. Okay. And again,
that's a very good point, because Biden himself said this, I think, last week, that the people who are complaining about the inflation, are complaining about the supply shortages, are just stupid. I mean, and Hillary Clinton said exactly that in her interview with Maddow. They're just stupid people. I mean, they're just
stupid people.
They're misinformed. Let me just say, they're just too stupid to understand the clever ideas that we clever people have. I mean, and then they're surprised by everyone in the polls.
Peter said people with no skin in the game, which made me think of this. The mandate for school. All right. So to add COVID-19 to the list of required immunizations for children in public and private schools, we polled this. It was a little bit closer than I thought. But when I looked into the numbers, it's opposed by like 6.5, roughly. All right. But when I looked into the numbers, especially by parental status, talk about not having skin in the game. All right. So most of the support comes from people who do not have kids currently in school. Okay. So if you have children, yes, one or more school age children under the age of 18, half of them strongly oppose adding COVID-19 to the list of immunizations that, required immunizations for to attend school. Right. And now that compares to, yes, one or more that has but they're not yet school age, so they're young children. But of course, still a majority of them oppose it. They do. It's just less intense, and they're much closer when it comes to strongly opposed to people who don't have children at all. And obviously, 47% of them basically they're tied at basically 47%. So among the closest margin is people who don't have any kids. Right. So again, who the hell cares? With all due respect, who the hell cares what they think? I mean, aside from maybe you're a teacher who doesn't have, who doesn't have children yet, that's fine. You don't have to remain in the public school system if you don't like. I mean, but the fact is, parents, we just had this big election in Virginia where all of these parental issues matter and drove these voters. Look at the number with parents. They're not trying to have this, guys. If there's a national movement to do what California did, and Gavin Newsom is already having problems implementing, he's being sued, right? So if there's a national movement, this is going to be extreme. The blowback is going to be extreme. They're not going to be prepared for it, I'm telling you.
Richard, you're a good pollster, and that's why we're talking to you, because you have a very good track record. I'm trying to get a good question out of this here. But other people poll as well. And I suppose if they can get up to your level, I'm paying you a compliment here, is that this stuff is knowable if you ask the right questions. Is this administration even interested in knowing these things? Because it seems to me they are so ideologically driven that, they, by force of will and their ideology, they will change things like a magic wand or something. I mean, that's what I can't fathom here. I mean, this type of stuff is knowable. The simple thing, do people have skin in the game on this one? I mean, I'm not a government official. I never want to be, but that's a fundamentally sound question to ask. I mean, do you think these people in the administration are asking these very simple questions?
When we started tracking, that's a great question. I don't think they care, Peter. I really for some of this stuff, because in the beginning, when we started to track COVID vaccination status, which we have here, and we also track trust in the vaccine, trust in its safety and in its efficacy. And the administration wanted this to be about, there's a quarter of people out there and by the way, still a quarter who have no plans to get vaccinated. They've made no progress, is my point. They have always looked at this problem as like, this is a Southern, uneducated, backward, evangelical, Christian, generally Christian Trump supporter problem. And, because we view it that way, we're going to run commercials during NASCAR and Deadliest Catch, things conservatives like to watch on TV. It was ridiculous to have that campaign in the first place. They knew it from the Kaiser data. They knew it from the CDC. We had polled, we saw it. This was not at all a left versus right. There's the anti, I would say, mandate crowd. And the I have no plans to get vaccinated crowd. I'm not going to call them anti-vaxxers because most of these people have no problems with other vaccines. It's this one in particular they don't want to get. All right. They are a coalition, yes, of very typical conservatives who distrust government and don't want them telling them what to do. But then there's the educated crowd who knows, and I mean even post-grad, college educated, who know that vaccines don't come on the market in 8 to 12 months. Like that doesn't happen. So they're skeptical of whether this vaccine was studied well enough. And then they're also afraid they may compromise their immune system down the long run. They just don't, they have very serious concerns. And I'm at a low risk. So why would I put myself at risk for a foreign substance in my body if I already caught and have recovered from COVID? There's just I don't see any point to that. The administration must have had the data that we've had. They just didn't care, Peter, is the answer. Black and brown people were highly skeptical of this vaccine from the beginning. Urban Black Americans were basically there was a subgroup of that was among the most skeptical. You're not going to reach them in a public service announcement, during commercials of NASCAR. And that's how they treated this problem. And after all of these months, these numbers haven't budged. Yes. So you would think it's about 3% or so that were forced to take it because of mandates. Their employer, they didn't want to lose their job or what they travel. They wouldn't have taken it if they weren't forced to, but it was not a significant percentage of the population. And after all of this time, they haven't shifted gears at all. So I just think they don't care. I don't know what else to say.
Well,
And
I
by
think
the
it's
way,
because of it's because of
booster status this month.
they wanted the narrative of the unvaccinated, the deplorables, the Trump MAGA crowd. They're one and the same. They are the enemies of the Biden agenda. They're the people who we hate. So I think they wanted. So no matter how many times you would tell them, yeah, but it's actually among African Americans that there was the greatest skepticism towards the vaccines, they wouldn't listen. No. Joanne Reed and Rachel Maddow would still trot out, no, it's the Trump supporters who are leading the anti-vax movement.
And they're younger, by the way, as well, which this month we have booster status. We had it last month too, but the booster wasn't available when we first started doing it. So we just had the two answers. I intend to get the booster. I have no plans to get the booster. This is now the second month in a row where 21% of people who are vaccinated with the 2-dose regimen. All right. So people like Peter, right? You said you got both doses. At least 20% of people who got 2 doses will not get the booster. So you have between 20 and 25% of the population now who didn't get the 2-dose. And then when you separate them out with people who did get vaccinated, you have another similar percentage among the vaccinated who won't get the booster. So this whole, you understand, this is going nowhere, is my point. Well, they haven't convinced anybody.
But see, the right strategy all along, particularly Biden, considering he was given the vaccines on a silver platter, the rollout was already in play here. I mean, if I'd been an advisor, I would have just said the obvious. This is a public health crisis, and we have to learn to manage it. Okay, manage it. But saying, everyone has to be vaccinated, everyone has to do this and that. When you're talking about a significant percentage of the population, a quarter of the population that's already made up its mind, and you can't reach them. But the smart strategy would be, okay, we got to manage this. Okay, this is a pandemic by definition. People are going to unfortunately lose their lives, but we have to manage it. And we have to manage expectations, and that's the biggest flaw in their strategy. They won't. Oh,
Laura's about to see her gifts. I hope Laura's not watching.
Too rigid. They're too rigid.
Yeah, and I this may have something to do with it too. This is again now months of tracking, asking people about, and I don't know. I mean, I know we're on the tube here, so I don't want to go overboard here, but people could look at the screen and see for themselves. This number rose this month. Okay, it rose from 3.5 to 5.2, and I don't want to say it out loud because I don't know if I can or we're safe to say it here. If people want to take the crosstab link, go check it out for yourself and look at how many people reported this. Look at it by age. This is now over months of tracking. We can confirm that this is not statistical noise. There is a very clear trend. The younger you are, the more you report severes. All right. And this is whether you break it down 18 to 29, 30 to 44, 45 to 64, or the age detail, which breaks it down even more. You could still see the very clear trend. 18 to 24 leading the way with 9.9%, 25 to 29, 9%. The 30 to 49 is about even. It goes 6.6 to 6.7, but then it starts to go down after you get to the 50 and above, where it's 5.1, it falls below the national average. And then the 65 plus seniors. Yes. But this has always been a pandemic of the elderly and the unhealthy. They have the least risk, according to their own self-reporting, to experience something adverse. They have the least. They're at the most risk for COVID. They have the least risk for adverse, events. Then that makes perfect sense if they decide they want to take it, and so I don't, but if you have, look, I mean, guys, 1 in 10 for 18 to 24, something's really wrong there. And nobody wants to talk about this.
That means that's a very serious argument in favor of just going without the vaccine if you're a young person, because, if you're a young person,
right.
My chances of getting COVID, or, even if I get it, that I suffer any symptoms are slim, whereas my chances of suffering adverse effects are great. So if you do a cost-benefit analysis, it makes sense to go without the vaccine.
And this is the same this month that it was 3 months ago. The only difference is that these numbers have ticked up. It was 3.5, I believe, or 3.4 when we first asked it. About 3, I think it was maybe 3.5 was the second month. It was about 3. But people say, well, that's such a tiny percentage. Well, 5%, over 5% is outside the sampling error for this poll. That's number one. Number two, that's 10 million people. All right. So do the math. This is not an insignificant problem. This is a major flag, people. A major flag. You would not find this if I did another different, and I'm trying to play a dance of words here, but if we did, let's say, the seasonal, the mist, whatever, I guarantee you're not going to get numbers like this. That's not going to happen, especially with this pattern. And people always, question the formatting of the question. That's fine. And I can explain that. We simply ask, please tell us which best describes your experience after taking, et cetera, et cetera. All right. Without going on to, I experience severe that prevent daily activity is the way that we took it verbatim from CDC, because there could be somebody who has a very similar condition or even the same condition that may experience, moderately. Which it interferes, but it's not preventing their daily activity. So that's not considered a severe event. That would be more of a moderate. If they had the same thing, let's say a headache, it was mild and it didn't interfere. Well, it was moderate and it did interfere, but it didn't prevent. Then, there are various degrees of how much a certain event can hurt different people. So it's not like we put conditions into mild, moderate, and severe categories. It actually not the way they do it. The way they do it is whether or not it prevented people from having daily activity, or it interfered with it, or it didn't at all interfere with it. This is mild, maybe had a little sniffle.
So looking at this in toto, is that it looks like this is an albatross around the Biden administration's neck. If they're not going to adjust their policies, they're just going to go further and further underwater on this issue, because given the numbers that you're presenting to us, and you've done a wonderful job in describing it. They can't reach a good part of the population. When you can't do that, that's right. That's when you change strategy.
But they haven't, Peter, and they won't.
That's right.
And I'm looking at some of these numbers and I'm thinking, when we were polling Virginia and we got some similar numbers in the generic ballot and the head-to-head, I'm looking at the 18 to 24, 25 to 29. It was like not that much movement among seniors. The swing group was the 40 to 64, but the youth vote, 18 to 29 and 30 to 39 categories were very close. And when I polled that, and we put out our polling with Virginia, that was one of the major criticisms that we heard. It can't be that close. That's why you have Youngkin up, because you're understating the call of support among young people. That wasn't true. We were right. The youth vote moved considerably away from Democrats, considerably. And it was very, very close. Right. And we're finding that now. And I can't help but to think, maybe this is part of why.
But that's a very interesting issue, because the administration, and it's true, governments across Europe, they're pressing young people to take this vaccine, and then young people can say, yeah, look, we are under in some risk of suffering adverse effects. Look at all these soccer players who are collapsing. It's got so serious that even major media outlets have picked up on this. They've reported it. So these are the fittest, healthiest people in the world. They're world-class athletes, and they're collapsing. Just simply
going down.
Yeah. So you have today Novak Djokovic saying he's not going to go to the Australian Open, I think, which he's won about 9 times, because they're insisting on a vaccine mandate. He says, if it's a vaccine mandate, I'm not going. He's the champion, the reigning champion. He says not going to do it because the vaccine mandate. He himself obviously feels that his health is in some danger from this vaccine.
Yeah, and we see, there are a lot of people. I went to the generic ballot by age detail, and Republicans are pretty much carrying every age group. If you break it down, it's with, there are some within the sampling era, but There is precedent for this. We saw this in 10, 14 was very close as well. So there absolutely is precedent for this. This is why when I opened it up, I said this is the worst poll for Democrats I have ever seen. And I am not somebody who has a big belief in big popular vote leads for Republican candidates, even on the generic ballot, but definitely as well on the presidential matchups. And you saw the NBC News poll, Republican plus 10, 49, 39. You can't get there without age groups breaking down like this. So, they found similar movements among young voters. And by the way, especially that 30 to 39 category, the 40 to 49 over here, seniors weren't that strong for Republicans. I mean, it was pretty surprising. That's not where the movement's coming from. It's coming from young, independent people. Younger, independent workers, students, whatever. I mean, it's a big deal. It's a historic poll. Guys, I agonized this poll could have came out a day before it came out. I agonized over the numbers because I just, I'm like making sure that everything was right. That's how I am. I'm meticulous. This is a very bad poll for Democrats. There was nothing. There was no silver lining. There was nothing. It was bad. I mean, it's that bad. And like Peter said, after a while, you think, well, I'm going to change my strategy, but they don't. And it just keeps getting worse. So we have a Republican +8 on the generic ballot. I think Laura said that's the biggest lead we ever found for a Republican ever on the generic ballot.
Is it bigger than the one that was in 2010 and before 1994?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we go back to 14. It's much bigger than that. Republicans didn't even have at this point. Republicans didn't even have what was a statistically significant lead. They had an advantage, I would say, and you could see that advantage. But they didn't have that much. We would typically find, R+3s, stuff like that. So there are some pollsters that had some pretty big leads for Republicans going into 2010, but not, some of them were, this early, but that was not the consensus. And I think here we're generally finding a consensus now. NBC, R10, us, R8, Suffolk, USA Today, R8, Rasmussen, R13. I mean, these are big leads. I mean, this is not something that you wouldn't expect. I mean, during a time like this, but there's in our polling, there's no precedent for it. Let me just put it like that. There is no precedent.
Have you come across any what's his name? Atlas.
Scott Atlas.
Yeah. Have you seen any of the coverage of his book? I mean, obviously he's been given coverage on Fox News, but what I have come across, I am just flat-footed on what he experienced. And it's very interesting as how Trump was stonewalled. And you could actually think that maybe the Biden administration is too. I mean, these technocrats, they don't really know much about science, do they? They really are just bureaucrats, okay?
I mean, look, Fauci called for Ted Cruz to be investigated yesterday. Yeah. Who the hell are you?
Yes.
Who the hell do you think you are?
Right, yeah.
I mean, I don't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry to
finish your thought, but I mean, that's
incredible.
Adding to my point. That's adding to my point here is that, they have the last word. Well, I mean, my goodness, public policy, it's something that you need to debate, something that is so important as this here. And you're basically saying, you don't agree with me, I'm going to have the FBI go after you, which he has no authority to do that. I mean, it's really quite extraordinary. And it tells us very much about the mindset of the people that stonewalled Trump during his administration and still have full power today under the Biden administration. Personally, I think these people could give a hoot about Biden. They think about themselves. I mean, they're careerists. Okay? It'll be another president. Who cares?
That's it.
But Fauci
and the FDA.
The Fauci has been doing this.
Guys. Their Twitter feed looks like a Democratic operative. I mean, it's outrageous. It's supposed to be the FDA.
It looks like a woke graduate student wrote it.
Yeah. Right. Well, look, I mean, there's no question. I mean, they held up the vaccine just in order to ensure that Trump would not win the election. I mean, because they thought, hey, this would help Trump. So, they held up the authorizing of the vaccine. So, but Fauci,
and we know for a doubt that Fauci lied in the summer. when Donald Trump said, I think there can be a vaccine by the new year, Fauci went out there and said, I think that's being a little bit generous. I don't think that's possible. He knew what he was saying at that time was a lie. And we know that from sources we have in Pfizer. He knew he was lying to the media. He knew that vaccine was coming before the new year. He knew it.
Yeah.
He knew it. And he lied in August, flatly lied, because God forbid people are told that Donald Trump got this thing done and it'll be available emergency use in October. You know, I mean, this is an unbelievable deception, you know, an unbelievable, but they did that on purpose. And here's the generic ballot by party, by the way. You know, Democrats generally, they're getting 9 and 10 of their own base. Republicans slightly a little bit more. There's almost no crossover with Republican voters to the Democratic candidate. There's a little bit, about 2 points more crossover with Democrats, but really you can see where it's coming from. The independent other. I mean, when Suffolk came out with theirs, I believe about 5 days before ours, and they were Republican, I think, leading among independents by 23 points. And I thought to myself, well, that's crazy. You know, I mean, honestly, I thought that's nuts. That sounds way too big for me. And here we have it. It's 23 points almost on the button. So, I mean, it's happening. This is real, is my point. It is very real. And you can't lead with independents by that big of a margin unless you see what we're seeing with younger voters, younger working voters. You just can't. The numbers aren't there. There aren't enough seniors. Right. You know, there aren't enough independent seniors to make that kind of a margin, guys. There aren't. The numbers don't add up. Has to come from young people.
What was interesting about your poll is that this Republican lead, or you know, these negative ratings for Biden, it was all across the board. Whatever the issue, whether it was the economy, whether it was crime, whether it was the border, whether it was COVID, even, you know, relationship with China, Biden was underwater in every single one of those. I mean, in some worse than others. I mean, in the case of the border and crime, he was doing really badly. But
yeah, that's the worst
area that Biden was doing. Oh, well, hey, this isn't bad. I mean, it's like it was all across the board. He has negative ratings.
Yeah, and just Richard, 2 months ago, he was still like +2 on COVID, but this last month was just a collapse. That was it.
I can't get away from my thesis that we've talked about earlier, because all of your data tells me that they don't care if they succeed. I mean, I think they're what they want to do is they want to push through things that don't have 50% plus 1 vote support.
Yeah,
they want to push through all of this, put it at Biden's footstep. He's if he makes it to the end of his term, it will be a miracle. Okay. And it's the Susan Rices and people like that this is their agenda. And, you know, they're just going to make Biden fall on his sword because they have no loyalty to him. They don't like him. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about, I mean, his presidential library will be a cloakroom in Obama's monstrosity. Okay. That's how much they care.
But the thing is, you know, that goes back to what we started talking about even months ago when we started doing this together. Where are they going to go? Because Harris is even less liked than he is. She's at 36%. And I know others even have her lower. Yeah, I think USA Today had her at 28.
28%. 28. Yeah.
Among independents, others, guys, she's in the 20s. The 20s. Nearly half of them strongly disapprove. Even 14, 15% now of Democrats don't like her. So, I mean, she is not a viable alternative in their universe, maybe. If you know, something happened at Walter Reed last week, you know, or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was, she would be in and they'd be ecstatic, but the country would not be. And I have to say, we polled this in 2020 in battleground states and nationally, and the Trump campaign did not seize on it good enough, which is that people did not like Kamala Harris. And we asked them how comfortable they were, and that basically she was going to be a Joe Biden heartbeat away from being president. And half of the country said that they were uncomfortable with the idea of Kamala Harris being Joe Biden's successor. And the Trump the Trump campaign, I don't know if they didn't have good enough polling or to find wedge issues. I don't know what was going on there, guys, but they totally missed that opportunity. Yeah, and it was a big one.
It proves our point. Identitarian politics trumped reality, trumped polling. Okay. Identitarian ideology is what is at the core of all of this. And I mean, it's extraordinary that they can't comprehend this. I mean, I suppose I'd be very curious if Willie Brown still supports her. Okay.
Oh, I'll tell you what, I went on a pretty good tirade the other day because, I'm not going to bring her up again, but all of these so-called, conservatives, they're so virtuous and holier than thou. They don't want to be associated with certain people. And these are the same people who have nothing to say about the vice president's behavior to get to where she is today. At least the one person acknowledges this is pretty much what I do for a living. And she's open about it. And this one is hiding and using those same things to get to where she is professionally. I actually have more respect for the one who does it openly and just says, look, I'm an adult star and that's it, but I happen to be a conservative in every other aspect of my life. And then it's like all of these DC conservatives are just too good for her, and it's like they're so full of crap. So they can slander her, but they have nothing because they're cowards. Yes. They have nothing to say about Kamala Harris's behavior. I am a father of a young daughter. There is no parent that I know of who would want their daughter to emulate Kamala Harris when she gets older. And nobody has the courage to talk about it.
One of the interesting optics I have noticed because of the masks is that every time she stands close to or behind Joe Biden, the mask thing creates this kind of subliminal in your mind. Is she sticking her tongue out, or
making faces?
Making faces. Yeah,
right.
It creates this kind of, unknown element, like what is going on with this person here? Okay. Because it certainly doesn't say anything coherent. And the cackling, I mean, that's one of the things that's brought her down, and she can't seem to control it. But I mean, because she's hiding her face, literally hiding her face, and no one knows how to trust, if you can trust that person. I mean, this whole mask theater works against them.
Yeah, just to tell people too, because I got some who asked, why didn't we put election integrity or immigration? The other category, the most cited was election reform, and the second most was immigration. The bottom line is this election is being dominated by the pocketbook. So, or at least is right now. Jobs in the economy is still number one. I don't know where some, you have that YouGov data that gets circulated among a million different institutions. The bottom, I don't know where they're coming up with cost of living now just overtaking COVID. We had them overtaking COVID a few months ago, and jobs in the economy was still number one, but cost of living, inflation is actually, you can see it right here, separated by a point now. It's probably going to overtake the economy and jobs. I wouldn't, let me put it this way. I wouldn't be surprised if it does, because it's been racing up so quickly. And then when we do the ranked distribution scores, which allow people to rank them from 1 to 10, most important, least important, cost of living actually does top the economy when we have them put into ranked distribution. This is the single choice. You're allowed to pick one. What's your top favorite issue? The next follow-up is do us a favor and rank them. And when we do that, cost of living overtakes everything else. COVID falls to number 4, by the way, just so everybody, I don't know where some people still have COVID such a big issue. We have it third at 12.2%. But what is different this year than last year is that if you chose COVID as your top issue last year, you were overwhelmingly a pro-Biden voter, overwhelmingly a pro-Democratic voter. Not anymore. Because, if you look at the most important issue versus the lead, which I should show real quick, where's Trump versus Biden? Here we go. So Trump has got almost a 20-point lead over Joe Biden on the economy. He's got a 2-to-1 lead, more than a 2-to-1 lead on cost of living. and he only trails Joe Biden by 11 points on coronavirus voters. So that was 30 points in 2020. 30 points, even more in some polls, because people were overwhelmingly concerned. Well, Trump was being irresponsible. He wasn't being strict enough. He was being careless with the masks and everything. That is not the case now. Now, there are a lot of people who are choosing coronavirus, still going for Trump over Biden because they're more worried about lockdowns and vaccine mandates than they are controlling the virus. Trump's got a big lead on crime.
I'm kind of surprised
across the board.
I'm kind of surprised that the issue of immigration and border control doesn't seem to be at all here.
It's in the other category.
Very small, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's in the other category. That and election reforms are in the other. And you can, and if you look at it, let me scoot it over in case it was my thing may have been in the way of the numbers. But those who did choose other, Trump has a big lead, 61-21, right. Because those voters are concerned about immigration and they're concerned about the border. I think at this point, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, immigration would have been much higher, at least 8%, somewhere in that ballpark. But it's the pocketbook right now. It really is. I mean, the stuff people are telling us is just incredible.
On immigration, do you find in your data, is that a single issue? Is that a single issue voter?
Not as strongly as it once was. There are people who are all about immigration and that's it, because they tend to feel that demographics are destiny, so they're all about it. But that has fallen considerably because it takes a back seat, I guess, to basic needs, guys. It is way to put it. When we asked about most important issue, if somebody chose cost of living, let me just put this up. If somebody chose cost of living, when we followed up and we asked them specifically regarding cost of living and inflation, which would you say most concerns you? What is the reason you picked this? 47.7% said food and groceries. We tried to mimic the CPI here. 18.9% chose housing, 16.4% housing shelter, and 16.4% chose gas and fuel. The rest was pretty much, behind the game. Taxes, insurance, medical insurance, healthcare, utilities did get 4.3, but still way behind. And transportation was 0.3. We basically took the CPI. We took the choices from the consumer price index. And I thought it was a pretty good breakdown, but also, keeps it consistent. And look at the younger voters. 41.1% of voters 18 to 24 chose food and groceries. That means they're much more in line with seniors and people 56 and up. So 50 and up. That's just incredible to me.
Richard,
it's very different.
We've talked for almost 2 hours, and what I find really remarkable, and I'm very impressed with your number crunching. I mean, I'm in awe, actually, of it.
Appreciate that.
No. I mean, this is such an education for me, because what we've been talking about is what people care about, what's really important to them. I mean,
yes, yeah.
Groceries in the richest country in the world.
Right.
Oh my goodness. But my point in here, my interjection here is that, well, if you turn on CNN and MSNBC and read the New York Times, it's all cultural wars. Where is the cultural wars in all of your data here? I'm sure it's there, but I mean, it's not top of mind for the people you're talking to.
Yeah, and that when people do choose a culture war issue, like public education, for instance, which is now a new culture war, you can see which is something going on, which is crazy. They're even losing that. So if they want to make it about culture wars, then Republicans should say, fine, no problem, do it. Because we don't tend, like abortion, education. Where's the most important issue? Again, just to show my point. Republicans have a lead among people who picked abortion as their number one issue. That never happens. And by the way, Glenn Youngkin carried those voters in Virginia by a very similar margin, 60-40. Here we have a 53-31. On public education, Republicans lead 54-34. This doesn't happen. Education is a Democrat issue. So they're even losing on those, Peter. It's just right now they're marginal, and the people are really talking about more
Richard,
key things.
If you add up gun rights, Second Amendment, public education, other
Exactly.
rights in, and abortion. What percentage does that come to if you add all of
Yeah,
that?
I mean, if you add them all up, here I'll get you the exact, so I don't just guess here.
Of course,
But
of course you.
yeah, I mean, it's 7.7 with gun rights and education, another 3, so that's 10.7. And what was the other one? Yeah, so it's about 1/10 of the electorate if you add up just those 3.
Right. So abortion, abortion, other which is.
Oh, I forgot. Oh, you're right. So 10.7.
Yeah, other abortion, other. That's
14.2,
11.2 gun rights. 11. No, it's around 16%. It's about. 16%.
Oh yeah. There's abortions 3.5. Excuse me. Yep. So you're looking at. I mean, it's a chunk. Elections are won on margins.
That's a significant chunk, yeah. Because Republicans lead in all of those areas. Yeah.
That's right, and they lead on 2 of the 3 biggest. They lead 2 out of 3, and those leads are big. I mean, they're not small leads. So again, go to most important and go to the generic ballot. Republicans lead on the economy by 20.9. So about a 20-point lead, 21-point lead. They lead on cost of inflation cost of living and inflation, 25 points. They only trail by 8 on coronavirus. I mean, and then healthcare, Democrats still maintain a nice sizable lead there, 35 points. But it's it's a distant number 4. It's not like that's right up there hugging the top 3. It's not. So I mean, that margin, they need it. They need every bit of that margin they can get. And then outside of that, guys, on environment, climate change, that's their biggest lead. Outside of that, they're losing on everything else that voters say is the top choice. Oh, so again, a really big point. I was skeptical of all of these big Republican leads we saw on these generic ballots. I'm not, a big believer in that, but it's real. That's it. It's real. I mean, this poll was ugly. I stared at the data set for a day. Like I was looking to see if I would find like Republican liars. Instead, do you know what I found? I found 4 or 5 African-American females who live in urban America who said they were Republicans and they were registered Democrats. That's what I found. So sometimes I'll go in and I'll cross the voter file responses. Right. I found like nobody who was lying to like skew the Republican data, to skew it towards. I did, however, find 5 woke young Black women who were
Richard,
trying to lie to us.
Just looking at this in its entirety here. So how would you answer the following question? Is this one big Democratic Party self-inflicted wound, or do Republicans have a positive message? How would you answer that? Self-inflicted wound.
And that's a great question. Look at and I don't have the other chart up here because I'll tweet it, or I did tweet it. And if people want to go to @peoples_pundit on Twitter, scroll down a little bit and you'll find the trend with congressional leaders. It typically is that Chuck Schumer, none of them are popular, but Chuck Schumer has the least unfavorable image out of all of them. And Kevin McCarthy has a problem, which is the more people get to know him, the more they dislike him. So he is a liability for Republicans if they want to win this House.
Mitch McConnell's numbers were really in the toilet. I mean,
they're always bad, but they were even worse again. And so was Nancy Pelosi's, but Mitch McConnell's got that extreme. When you combined somewhat unfavorable with very unfavorable, it's over 60% of the public who doesn't like Mitch McConnell. And that's because Republicans don't like Mitch McConnell. So at least when you look at the party image of congressional leaders, you see their own parties, Democrats, their voters circle the wagons. And they, generally still tend to like their leaders. Republicans, they don't like their leaders. I mean, Kevin McCarthy went from 31% never heard of, no opinion, to just under 24 this month. And that all went to, drum roll, very unfavorable. Right. So, it's just pathetic. Only 13.4% of Republicans have a very favorable opinion of Kevin McCarthy. 24.7 have a favorable, somewhat, favorable opinion of him. And that's just not good enough because 40% have an unfavorable. He's underwater with his own party slightly. Yeah. That even gets worse with Mitch McConnell. 6.7% of Republicans have a very favorable opinion of Mitch McConnell. Only 3.5% of independents do. I mean, guys, there are more Democrats in this poll who view Mitch McConnell favorably. What are very favorably, at least, not combined. But what does that tell you? They think Mitch McConnell is a pushover.
Yep.
And Mitch McConnell caves to them all the time. So they don't have a problem with Mitch McConnell. He's not been effective stopping it.
But this raises the interesting question, because if the Republicans do win decisively in 2022, then what happens? McCarthy becomes speaker. McConnell continues to be majority leader. So what have Republicans won? I mean, it's just same old.
I do have some inside information on that. And Kevin McCarthy wants the gavel badly. That's a problem. But Mitch McConnell is probably going to pass off the torch to John Thune, who is another sham of a Republican the base can't stand. So this is going to be a fight. I would argue, and this is not to make anybody's enemies with anybody, it's just the reality of the numbers. And anybody who follows my work, you know what I'm about to say is true. If Republicans really want to be a strong national party, they have to get rid of their leaders. They don't have to go. If they want to stay in the Senate, fine, but they can't be the face of the party. Kevin McCarthy does not represent the average Republican voter. Mitch McConnell sure as hell, even though he comes from Kentucky, he sure as hell does not represent the average Republican voter. I mean, the average Republican voter views China as a severe threat to the future of American liberty and American dominance. Mitch McConnell is their buddy. So, I mean, this is just crazy. The disconnect is that you cannot bridge this divide. This gap is too big. You can't, there's no engineering marvel to make a bridge to go across this canyon, man. It's too big.
Yeah, who in the Senate caucus can then challenge Thune? I mean, as you say, Thune is just another McConnell. Who is there who could challenge Thune?
You know, there are a lot of I would use the word traitors. There are a lot of traitors in the Senate, more so even than in the House. It would have to be somebody like a Rand Paul or a Ted Cruz, but Ted Cruz is very disliked by his peers. He is. Rand Paul isn't disliked. It's just that he might have a hard time putting together, but what he could do is potentially pull some votes from Democrats when they know they've lost the majority anyway. So they could maybe view him as somebody they could work with on metadata and some Fourth Amendment issues. There still are some silent, there are some silent senators on the Democratic side. They just don't speak up when we see these gross civil liberty violations. They don't speak up, but they don't like it either.
Okay, so Richard, what you're telling us, and I'm glad George asked this here. So what you're telling us, when we look at the generic poll that's out there, we've discussed at length. So there's a potential that the GOP will have a resounding victory in November of next year. Very likely they will take the Senate and nothing changes. I mean, what am I supposed to be happy about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, look, I would love to say something different, but I've been around a long time. I know this story all too well. I don't think Biden will be like Obama, but the spending will not get under control. Well, let me put it this way. The big budget left-wing spending items will not get passed. They're going to be dead in the water. But the budgets that we see, these ridiculous reconciliation budget bills, these omnibus spending packages, that's not going to stop. I mean, you know it and I know it. It's just not going to stop. What will stop are, HR 1, attempts to federalize the election system. I mean, there's no doubt there'll be benefits to Republicans with their priorities that they have. But overall, the voters of the country, outside of their base, they're going to want them to get inflation under control, or at least restrain Biden from making it worse.
With the exception of inflation right there, again, this is the same trend here. You mentioned issues which they can, like HR1 and things like that, but that's always reactive. They're not setting an agenda. They're reacting to an agenda. Okay.
Well, that's why I say the leadership has to go, guys.
Right.
It's about image, but also their old school where they react to everything the media does, to everything the Democrats do. Like a Josh Hawley is more proactive. Even Tom Cotton, much more proactive. Those are the guys that have to be the face of, I don't mean on Twitter. I mean, everybody sees them tweeting out on Twitter. You know, that's not, Twitter isn't reality. Every day when the American people see our congressional leaders, who comes to the microphone after Nancy Pelosi? Who comes to the microphone after Chuck Schumer? And they are always reacting instead of being proactive. That is, you know, it really should be like Josh Hawley's still, he's not a junior, but he's still, DC goes by seniority. You cannot become Senate Majority Leader easily if you're a first-term senator. It's just not reality. That's sad, though. That should change, but it's sad. It's true. Seniority is currency in the Senate, right, and in the House. I mean, it's current. That is currency. So Republicans have to change that if they really, you know, want to be able to have an answer to Peter's question and concern that is legitimate and has teeth, because we all know Kevin McCarthy is no Jim Jordan. You know, I mean, Jim Jordan represents the average Midwestern Republican voter, not just Ohio. That is the Republican base. Jim Jordan is the working class Midwest Republican base. That's him. Right. You know, it's not Kevin McCarthy who lives out in freaking California. I mean, you know, pardon my French. I mean, this is, it's crazy. It's just crazy. It's nuts. Meanwhile, what Democrats have, New York and California. Right. That's their leadership.
Rich, I don't know if you saw the article today in Politico about who will Trump pick as his running mate in 2024. And of course, it's entirely predictable. Oh, he's going to pick Tim Scott because, of course, he's black, or he's going to pick a woman because obviously she's a woman. You know, these are all ridiculous decisions. But what about somebody like Jim Jordan? Could Trump pick Jordan as his running mate? I mean, well, it's Ohio. So
you know, I tend to think that congressional leaders are not good running mates, or not. I mean, anyone from the House, you know, they just don't have a good track record. They're not viewed. Look at Paul Ryan. He could, not only could he not carry Wisconsin, he couldn't even carry southeastern Wisconsin for Mitt Romney. They got killed in Paul Ryan's first congressional district. They got crushed. So, you know, I tend to think they don't have enough clout. It's got to be a governor. Honestly, it's got to be Ron DeSantis. If he's going to run again, there are too many Republican voters who are just in love with Ron DeSantis right now.
Right.
And if he is not,
would DeSantis
if he's not it,
would DeSantis agree to be number 2?
Oh yeah, I think he would.
I think he would.
I do. Yeah. Absolutely. Yep. He's they had a very good relationship. I've actually had the opportunity to watch them you know, together, and they very clearly have a good relationship, that they get along very well. But also DeSantis would view it as like, I think he would view it as I'm being called to serve, and it's like it's a duty. So, you know, I have to answer that call.
No, Richard, I think he would say 2028. Okay. I think that's what he would say.
Yeah, well, that too. That too. Because look, would Trump have 2 terms? No. He'd be like, you know, Grover Cleveland, come back, clean up the mess, and, you know, his running mate would take over. And that's, you know, generally, or at least, you know, it's different now than it was back in Grover Cleveland's era. But I do see even with what the electorate is telling us, I see something very similar to Grover Cleveland, which is like, he was trashed, he was maligned, he was the outsider. Everybody hated him in the machine. They couldn't stand him. All the rich people got together, plotted this pathetic scheme to get rid of him. It worked. They implemented free silver, like, you know, what we're seeing with inflationary spending right now. You know, they implemented free silver. They crashed the whole damn economy and then begged Grover Cleveland to come back to fix it. And then when they did, they wanted him gone again. I mean, it's, you know, a love-hate relationship. And I see voters basically saying what, you know, very similar, which is, you know, I didn't like the boat rocking. I just didn't like the day-to-day boat rocking under Trump. And I wanted to try something that would go back to things being stable and normal. And Joe Biden promised to make them stable, and he didn't deliver on that promise. It's that simple.
Richard, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm down a rabbit hole and I'm very far away, but I mean, maybe I just got used to Trump, because it seems that the Trump years were a lot more stable than they are now. I mean,
Personally, I'm with you on that, because I think that the boat rocking was artificial. It was the media and it was those lifelong bureaucrats that you were talking about. Who cares what they think? That's right. But a lot of people did, those Tupperware party, Tupperware going suburban women. That's what, what they talked about. And that's how they felt. So
I think that is true. I mean, he did. And that was already obvious in 2015, 2016. He kind of rubbed suburban women the wrong way. I mean, they just didn't like him. And I mean, you could even tell from personal experience, you could talk to women, who are generally conservative Republican. They just don't like him. I mean, there was just something about his brashness, his crudity that turned rubbed women the wrong way. But these numbers that you show here, I mean, that's all been kind of forgiven and forgotten.
I kind of think, George, you may have been right when you said that it may be a good thing that he doesn't have a Twitter account anymore and that they depersoned him, because no, I'm serious. Like, all it leaves these people with now, and look at women, this is like Dukakis, Herbert Walker Bush level beating. Okay. Bush barely carried women against Michael Dukakis. That was the last time a Republican did. Now we're seeing women basically even Trump with a huge lead among independents. He barely bled out his base. Joe Biden he is bleeding out his in the rematch. And I think what all they have left, to think about now, George, is how it was, right? So yeah, he was an idiot. Yeah, he was crass. Yeah, he was a problem maker, but the economy was good. Right. Inflation was all right.
Or said differently, the guy is crude and rude, but at least I wasn't worried about the grocery bill.
That's right.
What was that?
That's right. That's exactly right. And by the way, if you cross those voters and nest them, you can clearly see he's winning the women who say cost of living is my issue. He's winning them handily. So, and by the way, if you look by race, interesting.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. How real are those numbers? Because he's got something like 16% of the African-American vote. I mean,
14.6.
Okay,
14.6. Okay. I think that's, generally it's that. I do think that's doable. I do. And I think what would happen here is you would see, basically it would probably tick up a little bit under 40 to Latinos. That would be in line with some of the trends we're seeing, maybe 35, 38%. But the most of them would probably go to Biden in the end. Asians, I actually thought Asians were a little bit high for Trump here. But so he's losing so many. This is the best age group for Republicans still outside of African-American voters. But I think whites would go to Trump. So when we looked at the more likely voter model, Trump went to just under 50, Biden. It was still about 8 points. Biden went to 42. Trump went to just about 50. So it was still an 8 point, deficit for Biden. But that's because those people far less, are undecided in the more likely voter model. But I think honestly, if you look at the Hispanic breakdown, and I don't think I have the origin numbers in here, I got to put them in there. The Cuban lead is just huge. And Biden has lost some support among Mexican and is a little bit among Puerto Rican Hispanics, but really it came from Cuban widening out his lead, and then also Mexican. Again, these are workers. And that usually is one of his worst groups, but they're also the ones driving the Republican shift in Southwestern and South Texas. So, when I see something like that, I don't question it, because I think he clearly outperformed his polling numbers among Hispanics. Clearly. Otherwise, he would not have won Zapata. He would not have turned around a 60-point swing in another county in South Texas. I mean, it's just crazy numbers. You can't do that if you're winning 30% of the vote. That's nuts. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Those are ridiculous polling errors. That's not reality. But yeah, Mexicans, I'll put that up there too. I don't know why I didn't get that up, but we have white by national origin and Hispanic we have Asian too by national origin. So Chinese, Filipino, Japanese, whatever it may be. But yeah, the Hispanic vote definitely was driven by probably the largest group is Mexicans, because they are the largest group. So if there's a few point shift, it has a much bigger difference than, a 10-point shift with Cubans who are only, a fourth of that vote size.
But for a Republican to win, I mean, generally, the conventional wisdom has it that Republicans really need about 58-59% of the white vote. I mean, that's normally, that's what, so 51% just isn't going to cut it. You need to be close to 60 to get it.
Yeah, I think what's happening here too. Look at someone else. Look at the someone else category. That would go down over time. It's not uncommon that the third party vote starts out ballooned. I think Rasmussen had it at 17. Ann Seltzer for Grinnell University, I think hers was around 13 too. Those people are not going to vote third party. This group over here, the 13%, they're overwhelmingly going to decide for Trump. Yeah. And then I think it would be fair to say the 15% of blacks who say they're going to someone else will largely go to Joe Biden. Right. I don't think, however, that it's a given that Joe Biden would get the remaining 12% of Hispanic. I just don't think that's a given, because these voters, we were right in Virginia with Youngkin's performance with them. That was another one people had a lot to say about, but we were right. If you're looking at people who identify as Hispanic, which I know a lot of them, people ask me why I don't also track white Hispanics. And the truth is, if you're identifying as white, that same thing with the census. If you're going to identify as white, then you're going to be put into the white category. I'm not saying Caucasian here. We're saying white, not Hispanic. We specifically tell them we don't mean Hispanic. So if you're still calling yourself white and you have Hispanic heritage, then you don't identify as Hispanic, and you would not be captured by exit polls as Hispanics. You just would. So it does look like it's maybe a little bit too much of the white vote, a little bit. It's not. It irons itself out. I do think this would maybe be an election where African-American voting would not be as high as it has been in the past. So there has been a very steady increase among the African-American share of the vote since the 90s, really since 1988, but since the 90s more solidly. And I'm not sure this is why some of the people who talk about voter suppression just really have no idea what the hell they're talking about. If anybody's overrepresented in an electorate, it's the African-American vote. So they're about 11-12% of the population, yet routinely come in at 13.5%, 14%. In Georgia, they are, 27%. They come in at 30% of the electorate. So if there was real suppression efforts, you would not be seeing consistent increases in their share of the vote. That's ridiculous. But I think this year it's possible that they are a little bit less. They were in Virginia, they were in New Jersey, even. So I could see something like that happening. We'll see.
Yeah, voter suppression comes after January 6th, right?
Yeah. No kidding. I mean, it's complete opposite of the understanding, that we think we may have, because of what you hear from the media. It's just totally backward. It's not true. It's a fantasy.
Working in media, I always reflect upon the fact, just how much do people, they may have some basic loyalties like to the left and all that, but it's kind of like when George and I watch Fox and they get one of their stupid contributors on, really stupid people, okay? And, they're talking about an issue I'm interested in, but I realize these people have no idea what they're talking about, and I just kind of fade it out, I just don't really pay any attention to it. And I just wonder if that happens to people on the left when they get the Looney Tune on and like, oh, there he or she goes again. It doesn't fundamentally change what you think. It just shows how much mainstream media has just made itself so irrelevant. Okay, yeah. It really is just like elevator music now.
Yeah, and they sadly, there's this diehard group of people, where we tell, like we were talking about with the cases before with Rittenhouse, all the Zimmerman, all of them, they want to be lied to. This remaining group of loyal voters, viewers they have, there's no other conclusion you could draw. The rest of the country largely understands they're lying pieces of trash. They got this now. And except there's this group, they want Rachel Maddow to lie to them. They want, potato head Brian Stelter to lie to them. It's like Russia collusion was not real. Why do you not appreciate that, that these people prey off of your ignorance? And it's sadly, that's the remaining group, though, that does have to be beaten into, because I feel like, we saw these protests afterwards, right? You had the Rittenhouse verdict. All of these protests come out. They're preying off of these people. These people are desperately searching for something meaningful in their life that's bigger than them, that's significant, that they could stand for. And they are told these lies, and they don't know any better. And these people use their ignorance, as fuel for the fire. And it's a dangerous situation. Well, I just wanted to point out too. Mm-hmm. Oh, God. Well, I just wanted to point out, look at the swap in the Catholic vote. Trump actually carries the Catholic vote by 8 points in this, which is a switch in our polling. It's usually pretty even. And that is because of what we were talking about before with the Mexican shift among Mexicans, shift among Cubans. They really, it wasn't primarily driven by white Catholics, which was interesting.
Fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, it was very interesting.
There was an interview with one of the major individual shareholders of the company that owns CNN. It was a really remarkable, it was at the end of last week, really remarkable interview. And here's a guy that is a shaker and a mover. I mean, what he wants, he gets. He's a shareholder. And he said that CNN has to completely reform itself. And he's saying basically, or it's not an interesting investment. He didn't say it exactly, but I mean,
wow,
what's its worth? If its viewership is tanking left and right and center, and all this money is being poured into it. I mean, it really portends to some major shifts, because there are plenty of podcasts now that get more than any of their top-rated shows. I mean, podcasts.
We crushed CNN. In our 2020 election coverage that we did, we crushed CNN, man. If you add all the channels together, it was, between myself and Larry Schweikert, we had channels, and it was Tracy Beans was streaming it. You just have all these people sharing it out. You really can. You can compete with these people. You absolutely can.
Right. Hey, Richard, can we join you?
Yeah,
can George and I join you?
Yeah, but the overheads are actually relatively small, because all it is.
And yes, you can, Peter, just so I answer that real quick.
Okay.
Go ahead, George.
Sorry, George, go ahead.
No. I mean, what I was going to say is that it's actually relatively cheap to run a cable news station, because all you need, you've got the talking heads, and you have to pay their salary. They get a big salary, but you don't have to pay for all the things that news organizations used to have to pay for, like, having news bureaus here and there and do all this original reporting. There's virtually no reporting. And many of the people who come on,
it's regurgitating.
They don't get paid. I mean, you go on and you say, whatever. What do you think of the Republicans? The Republicans are absolute scum. They're traitors. They're all working for Putin.
Yeah.
You don't even get paid for that. So that's it. So you've used up 5 minutes of time, and then it's advertising. So as a business model, it's not so disastrous. I mean, it's actually a very smart model. Well, limited overhead, a lot of advertising revenue.
And on top of it, the CNN's biggest advantage is its licensing fees. Every airport in the world and hotel rooms. That's where they make their money, licensing. Okay, it's not membership. Okay, it's license.
And there should be, I don't know what the answer is to this, gentleman, but the amount of money that Big Pharma and others give to these cable news outlets, the advertising. I mean, if you just watch, watch MSNBC one night, watch Fox News, from both ends of the spectrum, you'll just see, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, whatever. One drug after another. Do you have small nose syndrome? Like, I remember that skit? They come up with all this crap. They was watching the other day, and the guy's like, I'm not going to survive COVID just to die from the flu. Get the new super flu shot. I mean, this is all they talk. And then we're expected to believe that they're going to cover these things impartially. Get out of here. Their model is broken, from a sense of whether they could be ethical or not. I think that it's baked in the cake and they cannot be. And it's a broken model that needs at least reforming.
If you look, you can look at all of those commercials from a different angle. I agree with you completely, but there's another thing it should tell you is that the kind of advertising is pointed to the viewer, and the viewer is old boomers. Okay, I mean, yeah, it's all health. It's all health problems. Everybody's got health problems, but it's all boomer stuff, and that demographic is shrinking. Okay,
and that's who. But you're right. That's who they gear it all to, right? So I mean, it's just not. It's not conducive to having, a credible and impartial vehicle to receive information. It's just not. It's probably the worst possible one you could think. And Joy CNN, Reid, by the way, may be thrown out at MSNBC from what I've been told.
She gets low ratings. I mean, that they gave her that slot, but she doesn't have good ratings.
John Nicosia said that he had video or audio coming out from Comcast high up on the food chain, said, and that was the 22nd. I got to go back and see if he ever got that tape, but he said there's serious talk all the way up the chain at Comcast about Joy Reid's future at MSNBC. And the source told him more to come, including audio. The audio is coming Monday. Have a great Thanksgiving weekend. That's today. Let's see if he's got the audio out. Oh, I can't wait. Oh, I cannot wait. Right. Jack Dorsey has resigned from Twitter.
Yep.
That was about an hour ago. What?
No major loss there.
I mean, I got to read that, but I guarantee, it's not like he made some move to do anything legitimate. Let's get real. I doubt it's because he was pushed out trying to be a champion of the First Amendment. I seriously doubt it.
I imagine he's, like all these billionaires, he's got some idiotic project he wants to go and do something on. Like,
sorry, I'm over here just sharing my screen, scrolling through Twitter. Sorry about that.
I don't think it's just a matter of, hey, I want to do something. I want to save the world. Like all these billionaires, they're all egomaniacs, and they all have I've got a great philanthropic project to save everyone.
I know. Yeah, I know it. It's just ludicrous stuff, but that's how they get their standing, though. And that stuff matters in their world. It really does. Yeah. And before I stop the screen share, just show the Trump v. Harris. This is a thumping. This is a 10.5% lead. America can't stand this woman. Donald Trump barely goes up a little. It's just Harris comes down from where Biden is. So that's the difference in the 8 to almost 11 point difference. Kamala Harris can't carry a single age group. She basically barely wins the 18 to 24. Barely. It's abysmal. She loses more of the black vote. She loses more of the black vote than Joe Biden does. That may be what you were thinking about, George. 16% goes to Trump over Kamala Harris. So this idea that black voters like Kamala Harris better because they, identify with her or something is totally ridiculous. It's not true at all. They like an old white man better.
They identify with her Canadian childhood, right?
Or her, let's be honest, and I'm not trying to, I'm trying to bring religion into this, but Kamala Harris is not a Christian. Black Americans in this country are primarily Protestant Christians, and they don't have anything in common with a Buddha or Hinduism. She's got according to the book, her mother says she never was partial to Christianity and always identified with Hinduism.
Is that right?
So, yeah, that's right. Yep. She never considered herself to be a Christian at all. And,
Richard, is she African American? Is she Asian American? They can't even get that straight.
I know it. And first African American vice presidential. No, she's not.
No, she's not.
She's Jamaican and Indian. What the hell are you talking about? Yeah. Unbelievable.
Well, look at Obama. Obama's claim to be an African American was always ridiculous because his father was African, but he was certainly not an American.
He wasn't American.
And he only met his father about once in his life as a boy, and he was brought up by white women, his mother and his grandmother. So he spent, and then he lived in Indonesia for a while with his stepfather. So his claim to be an African American was always just laughable. Everyone has to repeat a mantra. Oh yeah, he's an African American. He understands the plight of African Americans. I mean, he's completely un-African American.
Yeah, because God forbid you question, right, the details, right?
Yeah.
So God, that's just semantics, you racist.
Right.
Well, what are you talking about? She's not African American. What are you talking? Yeah, Michael Knowles, I believe. Maybe it was Michael Knowles. Somebody got in trouble. Fox, they were a contributorship, and basically pointing out on Twitter that was an erroneous claim. What are you talking about? Got in deep hot water. Michael Knowles got in trouble for telling the truth about Greta Thunberg's mental condition.
No, I think it was.
What that was.
I think it was some woman. I don't think it was Fox. I think it was maybe at ESPN or somebody who I think had blurted out that Obama wasn't African American.
George is right.
Yeah, he was brought up by white women. I mean, that's it. So why call him an African American? I mean,
rabidly left wing.
Right.
Some rabidly left-wing white women too, boy. Right. Let me tell you, holy moly!
We can end on this, gentlemen. Is when there is when your opponents are in a circular firing squad, don't get in the way.
Just back away. Yeah,
back away.
That's a good way to end it. I agree. That's the lesson.
So Richard, this is always such an education. Oh my God, I can't. But I'd like you maybe at another time to explain how you actually do this. Okay, this is huge.
Yeah, we can do that. We can absolutely do that. I do that too on Inside the Numbers. We'll go on the survey software, and we'll go and check it out, show how the questions are made and what order they're in.
One of the reasons why I'm asking is that for a time I worked for Colgate-Palmolive when I was living in Poland, and I used to do questionnaires. So I'm very curious on how you come up with your questions, because I think that's if you don't have good questions,
we could do that.
Answer.
Absolutely, we can definitely do that. And by the way, just last real quick, that is how some of them schemed on the mandate questions. The way they asked them were very crafty and definitely intended to elicit an answer instead of simply gauge public opinion. Yes. So there is truth to that without a doubt. But we can definitely do that. And
there's something else that maybe you could talk about is this voir dire. I'm kind of really interested as to what kind of questions should lawyers ask prospective jurors, because they don't seem to do that, and then they get these dumb juries and who vote against them. So what sort of questions should they be asking to get the kind of jury that they need?
That's another. Let's do it because that took years to perfect. Years. Right. People lie. I know it may be. It may come as a surprise to some people. People lie. They think they know exactly what you want to hear. So you have to ask questions that provoke them to unknowingly tell you their belief systems.
Yes, exactly.
And and that is the name of the game. So if it was me, I wouldn't sound anything like what the lawyers you see on TV, on court TV, on wherever, streaming live, picking juries. Very different questions. Something that sounds completely irrelevant. Exactly. And that's what you have to answer, because jurors will lie to you. And I know it's shocking to hear, but it's true.
Because if you ask them, can you be fair-minded? They're all going to say, yeah, of course I can be fair-minded. Absolutely, yeah.
Of course I can. Meanwhile, I'm a BLM protester, and I'm dying to get on this jury to punish Derek Chauvin, Mr. Mitchell. Yes. I mean, it's unbelievable they didn't catch that guy. It's a perfect example. Of course I can be. Yeah, that's another great topic. We should do that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
Well, this is really great. So thank you so much. Always our discussions with you are so fascinating, and I'm always left with so many questions I'd love to ask, but there's no more time. But thank you so much for this, Richard. It was really kind of
as always, guys. No problem. Love coming on. No problem. All the best. Thanks for having me.
All righty. All right. Take care.
Bye.